subscribe, like the video, and, if possible, join Patreon. But if you don't have much money, you can support the channel by watching the novels on euroaudiobooks.com. Remember that you can participate in the polls so that your favorite novel gets published for free.
Strength is definitely very strong. With Big Mom's steel balloon and Whitebeard's physical strength, Chuanjin, who took this move, already felt a little sore in his arm. You really deserve to be the second in command of Devil's Heart. Swinging his arms, looking at the figure of Blue Note, Luo Zhen couldn't help grinning and said. Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Blue Note frowned, smiled at Luo Zhen, and said, "You're not bad either." There were 2 long and narrow wounds on Blue Note's body, and 500 blood on the wounds had dried up. Seal the wound with magic power and temporarily block the blood. At this moment, there was a loud noise behind Blue Note. Turning his head and looking behind him, he saw a huge wave beating violently on the sea. It slapped heavily on the island, making a loud noise. The impact of the waves made their footsteps a little unsteady. Blue Note's complexion changed, and the turbulent sea water kept rushing up to the island, submerging the place where the two fought before in a short while. But this is not enough to make Blue Note's face change drastically, because behind the waves, there is also a bigger and more powerful wave sweeping in with a huge momentum. Blue Note's expression became dignified. He looked at the towering Tower of Heaven, and then at the waves that were even taller than the Tower of Heaven. Turning his head to look at Luo Zhen, Blue Note looked solemn. Are you crazy? For a tsunami of this level, even if you are very strong, you will be swept away by the tsunami. Luo Zhen grinned, folded his arms, and said to Blue Note, "Isn't your ADF goal just this Tower of Heaven? Under a tsunami of this level, are you still able to occupy it?" Blue Note's face sank, and he glanced at the rapidly approaching waves. Shout out to the duo who are fighting on the Tower of Heaven. Zankro, Kane, time to go. Following the roar of Blue Note, 2 figures jumped out from Tower of Heaven. It fell heavily on the ground. The 2 quickly came to Blue Note and saw the raging tsunami on the sea. Hey, are you kidding me? Deputy Commander, what should we do? We can't survive a tsunami of this level. Zankro and Kane looked dignified, watching the tsunami that hit them heavily. Blue Note turned to look at Luo Zhen and said to Luo Zhen, once again, I sincerely invite you to join Grimoire Heart. Otherwise, you and your partner will die under this tsunami. With a look of pity in Blue Note's eyes, he said to Luo Zhen seriously. Luo Zhen shook his head, pointed to a figure that appeared not far away, and said, "Let's go first. You should think about how to get out of here." The figure of Zeus in the distance is coming at a gallop. His body becomes huge, and he is rushing towards the Tower of Heaven. "Master, here I come." Zeus roared and rushed to the top of the Tower of Heaven. "Erza, you. Go to Zeus first," Luo Zhen shouted at Erza and others above the top floor. Erza and the others didn't hesitate. They jumped up from the Tower of Heaven and landed on Zeus' back. Immediately, Luo Zhen turned his head, smiled at the 3 of Blue Note, and said, "Blue Note, or else you quit Grimoire Heart and join my acceptance, and I can take you out of here too." Raising his eyebrows, Blue Note ignored Luo Zhen. An airship appeared in the sky. A few ropes fell from the airship and landed in front of the 3 of them. "The next time we meet, I hope we can decide the outcome." Grasping the rope with his palm, Blue Note turned his head and smiled at Luo Zhen and said. Luo Zhen raised his eyebrows, and the fighting spirit in his eyes was awe-inspiring. "Hope so." When the figures of Blue Note and others disappeared into Luo Zhen's sight, Luo Zhen did not hesitate. With a fierce step on the ground with both feet, the whole person soars into the sky. It landed firmly on Zeus' back and floated in midair. Grimoire Heart's airship did not leave immediately, floating not far from Luo Zhen. He watched helplessly as the tsunami beat on the tower continuously. Wave after wave of tsunamis came, and the island was quickly submerged. Even the towering Tower of Heaven couldn't withstand the impact of the tsunami, and was soon broken in the middle by huge waves one after another. Seeing that the Tower of Heaven broke and fell into the sea with his own eyes, Blue Note ordered to leave. Looking at the airship going away, Erza opened his mouth. Erza, who wanted to say something, opened his mouth, but he hesitated to speak. "What's wrong?" Noticing Erza's strangeness, Luo Zhen asked curiously. "Who were those people just now? Do you know Luo Zhen?" Luo Zhen nodded and said with a smile, "They are one of the Balam Alliance, the strongest dark guilds so far, Grimoire Heart. Blue Note and I met in a commission, but at that time Blue Note and I were still enemies." Hearing what Luo Zhen said, Erza's complexion became serious. "Are we going to catch them now? With Zeus around, we can shoot them down." Hearing that they were the Dark Guild, Erza raised his eyebrows and said. Luo Zhen shook his head and said, "Although they don't have an advantage in the air, it is also difficult for us to fight, and there may be other enemies in that airship. So there's no need to take this risk, not to mention that we have succeeded in this entrustment up." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Erza was silent for a while, but surprisingly, he didn't refute Luo Zhen's words. In Tower of Heaven, Erza briefly fought Zankro. She knew she would have a hard time taking Zankro down. Chapter 75, The Hit Erza. "I see." Looking at the airship going away, Erza fell into silence. She also knew that what Luo Zhen said was right. Among the three people just now, the blonde boy is very strong. Even though he used the Yindi armor, which can enhance the flame resistance, he was almost injured by the black flame. The flame of black seems to be able to devour everything. If not for the appearance of Prometheus to save Erza, Erza might have been burned by the flame of black. But the price was that Prometheus was caught in the hands of the blonde boy, and he kept gnawing on Prometheus' body. Erza was terrified at that time. Erza had seen Natsu eat fire. But I never thought that Prometheus would be caught in someone's hand one day and treated as food like rice balls. Fortunately, Erza reacted in time and saved Prometheus from Zankro's struggle. Accepting what Luo Zhen said, Erza sat quietly on Zeus's body as if he had been hit. Seeing Erza's silent appearance, Luo Zhen walked to Erza's side, put his arms around Erza's shoulders, and embraced him into his arms. Leaning his face on Erza's forehead, he smiled and said to Erza, "What's the matter? Because you were hit by this?" Erza was silent and didn't speak, but the darkness in her eyes exposed her heart. Leaning on Luo Zhen's shoulder, Erza was silent for a long time and finally spoke and asked Luo Zhen, "Can my strength really keep up with your footsteps? I'm really scared. I will become your burden. I don't want to hold you back. I want to be by your side all the time." Erza's body was trembling slightly, and her white and tender palms were tightly clutching Luo Zhen's sleeves. Luo Zhen stretched out his palm and caressed Erza's fair and tender cheeks, prospering Erza's small face. Luo Zhen's eyes were piercing, and he looked into Erza's eyes seriously. "We will be together forever. And who said you would hold me back? Didn't you help me hold back an enemy this time? Otherwise, Ulu and I would have to deal with 3 people. If it weren't for if you're here, we might be besieged." Luo Zhen's eyes were sincere, and his voice softly echoed in Erza's ears. Beside the two, Ulu dragged Prometheus and Napoleon to his side. He preached to them, "The next picture is not suitable for children. Come over to me, both of you." "Okay, Ulu, big sister." "Damn it, I want to watch it." Napoleon lay in Ulu's hands honestly, but Prometheus still had a little more to say. But he was helplessly caught by Ulu and pulled to Ulu's side. Stared at by Luo Zhen's sincere eyes, Erza's cheeks flushed with blush. She lowered her head shyly, but was held up by Luo Zhen with her palm. "It's an old couple, why aren't you shy?" Seeing that Erza was no longer depressed, Luo Zhen grinned and said. Erza rolled her eyes at Luo Zhen, leaned her head on Luo Zhen's shoulder, and her eyes gradually became firm. "Okay, the commission is complete. Let's go home." Luo Zhen stretched his waist and put his hands on Erza's shoulders. Erza pointed to Jalal, who was lying on the ground and passed out, and said, "Then what should he do? Should he be handed over to the Senate? Take it home first. It will be of great use to keep him." Luo Zhen glanced at Jalal, who was still in a coma, and showed a mysterious smile. Zeus galloped in the direction of Magnolia at high speed. Soon the group saw a continent appear in sight. Zeus didn't stop at all. He flew directly to the city by the sea and rushed in the direction of Magnolia. When he was about to reach Magnolia, Jalal opened his eyes drowsily, with confusion shining in his eyes. Seeing the distant clouds receding in sight, Jalal opened his eyes abruptly. Suddenly felt a severe pain in his left arm, which made Jalal frown. Woke up, the familiar voice reached his ears, and Jalal turned his head to look in the direction of the voice. I saw Luo Zhen resting his hands behind his head, looking at him with a half-smile on his face. Jalal looked down and asked Luo Zhen, "Where is this place? Where are you taking me?" At this time, Jalal had already suffered serious injuries. His arm was cut off at the shoulder, and Luo Zhen continued to attack after being close to him. Zero. Asking for flowers. Jalal felt pain all over his body. With a low voice, Jalal's voice was a little weak, and he looked at Luo Zhen with a pale face and asked, "Where is the Tower of Heaven? Where are you taking me?" Here we are." Luo Zhen pouted in front of Jalal, but did not answer Jalal's words. Jalal turned his head, and a huge city appeared in front of the group of people. Jalal looked at the city suspiciously, and then glanced at Luo Zhen. "This is Magnolia, the city where the Fairy Tale Guild is located." Hearing Magnolia's name, a bitter smile appeared on Jalal's face. Did it fail after all? What about the Tower of Heaven? Jalal looked at Luo Zhen with depressed eyes, then lowered his head and asked with a wry smile. Destroyed. Luo Zhen didn't hold back his own news, and after fainting Jalal, he told Jalal the truth about what happened on the island. A look of surprise flashed in Jalal's eyes when he heard that the Grimoire Heart had reached the Tower of Heaven after he passed out. Grimoire Heart? Why do they know the location of Tower of Heaven? And what is their purpose in Tower of Heaven? Jalal's face was sullen, and he was constantly deducing what the purpose of Grimoire Heart was in his mind. Luo Zhen shrugged his shoulders, leaning his arms on his head, and said, "Then I have to ask you, isn't it possible for you to cooperate with the people from Grimoire Heart to release the magic spirit power?" Jalal shook his head and said with a serious face, "I have never had any contact with anyone from Grimoire Heart, let alone any cooperation." Suddenly, a figure suddenly appeared in Jalal's mind. That brunette girl. So it is. Jalal's brain is not bad, and he knew the cause and effect of everything in an instant. Before being swallowed by the Erza system, streams of memories kept pouring out of Jalal's mind. Among those memories, there is a figure of a girl in Jalal's mind. But Jalal didn't know the girl's name. Chapter 76, Jalal's Choice. Squeeze his wool. Back in Magnolia, Luo Zhen took Jalal back to his home. Because Jalal could not be exposed, Luo Zhen thought for a moment and rented a room for Jalal around his own house. He brought Jalal to the rented house, opened the door, and said to Jalal behind him, "You can live here temporarily for a while. You should recuperate your injuries here first. After you recover from your injuries, I have something to ask you." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Jalal raised his eyebrows and asked Luo Zhen's back, "Is there anything to connect with you?" Luo Zhen turned his head and grinned at Jalal and said, "Although we have nothing to talk about, but don't you want to know why you became what you are now? I'm here for information about you." Looking at the bright smile on Luo Zhen's face, Jalal fell into a 070 silence for a moment. Among the scattered memories in his mind, Jalal was indeed curious about his identity. Good. After a long silence, Jalal raised his head, and a little starlight gathered in his eyes again. "By the way, the toiletries and daily necessities in the house have been prepared for you. I will send someone to deliver meals to you during this time. You'd better not leave this room. You may not know that your identity in the council has been exposed. If you appear in the sight of the council now, you will probably be hunted down by the council you once served in." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Jalal walked into the house. The house is not big, but it has everything you should have. Seeing that Jalal ignored him, Luo Zhen didn't continue to say anything, shrugged, and left here. Watching the back of Luo Zhen leaving, Jalal stood at the window, watching Luo Zhen leave. After struggling in his heart for a long time, a bitter smile appeared on Jalal's face. "Forget it. Trust you once." Watching Luo Zhen's figure gradually disappear into the crowd, a bitter smile appeared on Jalal's face. Luo Zhen, who came back home, saw that Erza was cleaning, and Luo Zhen stepped forward and came behind Erza. Standing behind Erza, Luo Zhen stretched out his arms gently behind Erza's willow waist, which he held tightly. Being embraced by Luo Zhen behind him, Erza's movements suddenly stopped. Turning his head and giving Luo Zhen a white look, he stretched out his hand and patted the back of Luo Zhen's hand. He said softly to Luo Zhen, "What are you doing?" "I'm cleaning up." "Oh, it's the same if you clean up later. I want to hug you right now." Luo Zhen leaned his head on Erza's head and rubbed Erza's long hair. Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Erza couldn't help showing a happy smile. Putting the broom in his hand aside, he broke away from Luo Zhen's arm. He stretched out his hand to support Luo Zhen's cheek and then rested his head on Luo Zhen's chest. That strong heartbeat kept pouring into Erza's ears, which made Erza's heartbeat for a while. I don't know how long it has passed, but the two hugged each other quietly. At this time, the sound of the sun gurgling suddenly reached the ears of the two of them. Erza raised his head suddenly, looked at Luo Zhen and asked, "Are you hungry?" Luo Zhen scratched his head and said with a smile, "It's been a long time since I ate the food you cooked." "Then I'll cook for you." With a happy smile on Erza's face, she bounced to the kitchen. Wearing an apron, he started to get busy in the kitchen. Looking at Erza's busy back, the corner of Luo Zhen's mouth curled up unconsciously. The two have been together for so many years, and the relationship has become a dullness in life. An action or a word from the other party can let the other party know what he wants to do. Luo Zhen didn't leave, leaning against the kitchen door frame with folded arms, watching Erza's busy back. Not long after, Erza sat down and finished the meal, and the fragrant meal was brought to the table. "Let's eat." With anticipation in Erza's eyes, she sat beside Luo Zhen with a small face. "Tasty." After taking a sip, Luo Zhen was full of praise for the already familiar taste and gave Erza a thumbs up. Seeing Luo Zhen gobbling it up, Erza's eyes were full of happiness. "Eat quickly, too." The dish with one chopstick was stretched out to Erza's mouth, and Erza opened his cherry mouth under Luo Zhen's gaze. A simple lunch, between the two of you and me, took nearly an hour to finish. Originally, Erza wanted to rush to wash the dishes, but was stopped by Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen kept saying, "You do the cooking, and I wash the dishes," pushing Erza out of the kitchen. Seeing the back of Luo Zhen busy at the sink, Erza smiled happily. After washing the dishes, the two sat on the sofa, quietly enjoying this quiet moment. Luo Zhen, "The commission has been completed. Is it appropriate not to speak to the president?" Pillowing on Luo Zhen's arm, Erza put her small face on Luo Zhen's chest. Listening to the powerful heartbeat beating in her ears, Erza suddenly raised her head and asked Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen smiled, reached out, and pressed Erza's head back. "We have worked so hard to make commissions. What's the matter when we come back to rest? And this commission was appointed by the council. The president may wish that we would come back later." "Huh? What?" Erza was a little surprised and wanted to raise his head, but was held down by Luo Zhen. "The commission from the council is mandatory to be assigned to our fairy tale. If we can easily complete this commission, next time the council will probably come up with something else. You must know that there are many wizards' guilds in the kingdom of Fiori, so we can't let the council take care of our wool." Luo Zhen smiled lightly and told Erza the easy-to-understand truth. As the chairman of Fairy Tale, Carlos Ma couldn't refuse the commission assigned by the council. "But as long as you don't complete this commission so quickly, you can excuse yourself next time with a lack of strength of 0.3. Erza nodded ignorantly, not sure if he understood. But there are still some things that Luo Zhen didn't tell Erza. This time, the House of Council launched the magic spirit power, which almost caused an accident to the two level 5 wizards of Fairy Tale. Naturally, Carlos Ma would not let the magic senate go easily, and he wanted to pluck a little wool from the senate. Carlos Ma has been the president for so long, and it is impossible for Carlos Ma to be unaware of this fact. Moreover, as the president of Fairy Tale, which has been operating in Magnolia for many years, Carlos Ma got the news much faster than himself. Although I haven't reported to the Horse Carlo in the guild, but the Horse Carlo should know that I have come back. Ma Karloff didn't ask anyone to urge him, which presumably has such a meaning in it. Chapter 77, You Look Beautiful. Nervous Iceman. The next day, Erza opened his eyes in a daze, with a little sleepiness in his hazy eyes. Suddenly feeling a gaze looking at him, Erza raised his head to look. Luo Zhen had a smile on his face, looking at him with a half-smile. Erza's pretty face flushed, a shyness flashed in her eyes, and a blush was stained on her pretty face. "What are you looking at?" Luo Zhen rolled his eyes with a shy blush on his face, and said coquettishly to Luo Zhen, "Look how beautiful you are." Luo Zhen grinned and reached out to caress Erza's pretty face. With a happy smile on Erza's face, he leaned his cheek against Luo Zhen's chest, and the pounding heartbeat kept ringing in Erza's ears. "Get up soon. Let's go to the guild to report to the guild master about the entrusted matter." The two chatted on the bed for a long time. Luo Zhen stretched out his hand and patted Erza's head and said softly. Erza nodded 3 times. Erza, who has never been in bed before, will inevitably be in bed today. Getting up and stretching, the willow waist that is not enough to grasp suddenly appeared in Luo Zhen's sight. Graceful figure, white and tender skin. Luo Zhen couldn't take his eyes off for a moment. "What are you looking at?" Erza glared at Luo Zhen in embarrassment and pulled the quilt aside to cover her body. Luo Zhen scratched his head and walked out of the room under Erza's angry eyes. Seeing the back of Luo Zhen leaving, Erza breathed a sigh of relief. Although the two have been together for a long time, Erza is very shy every time he does this kind of thing. The two can be regarded as an old couple, but seeing each other naked can still make Erza shy. Erza got dressed and walked out of the room, but did not see Luo Zhen in the living room. Curiously, he looked around the room and found that Luo Zhen was busy in the kitchen. "Come on, we can have breakfast right away." Hearing Erza's footsteps, Luo Zhen turned his head with a smile on his face, and the gentle smile was particularly dazzling in Erza's eyes. Luo Zhen's gentle voice echoed in Erza's ears, making Erza smile involuntarily. Erza nodded slightly, and after a while a simple breakfast appeared on the table. "Hurry up and eat. We'll go find a meeting after we finish eating." Luo Zhen sat on the table and began to gobble it up after a while. Simple breakfast, simple conversation, but it made Erza feel extra warm. Not long after the two were full, Erza washed the dishes and put them aside to dry. The two didn't take Ulu and the others with them. They walked out of the house by themselves and walked towards Fairy Tale. Because the house they bought was very close to Fairy Tale, they arrived at the guild in a short while. Before entering the guild from a distance, the noisy voice reached the ears of the two. There was a look of helplessness on Luo Zhen's face. This is Fairy Tale. The uproarious voices kept piercing into the ears of the two of them, and Erza's complexion suddenly turned livid. Natsu and Gray can clearly be heard arguing among the voices. Erza strode forward and walked straight into the guild. Looking at Erza's furious back, Luo Zhen had a meaningful smile on his face. Following Erza into the guild, he immediately saw 2 teenagers holding their heads in the center of the guild. He stared at the other party angrily and kept saying harsh words in his mouth. Everyone in the guild was surrounding the two of them, looking at the two of them in the quarrel with joy on their faces. The crowd continued to provoke the two of them, as if they wanted to make the two of them fight. "Natsu, beat Gray up." "Gray, can you bear this tone?" "It's me, I can't bear it." "That's right, your brother is watching." "Natsu, don't be afraid of grit." Everyone in the guild is not afraid of making a big difference and keeps adding fuel to the fire. Sure enough, the two were quickly excited by the voices of everyone in the guild. Looking at the other party angrily, they would fight at any time. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the guild, and Erza walked towards the guild step by step with a pale face. The uproarious voice, just now, stopped abruptly, and he watched Erza's figure with his mouth tightly shut. Gray and Natsu glanced slightly, trying to see what kind of movement it was. But after seeing Erza's figure, the expressions of the two froze instantly on their faces. He stared blankly at Erza approaching step by step. "You two, are you going to fight again?" Erza put his hands on his waist, and the momentum immediately made the two of them too frightened to speak. Staring blankly at Erza with his hands on his waist, the two suddenly recovered and shook their heads in a tacit understanding. No, We are good partners in the guild. How can we fight? You're right, Natsu. 103. That's right, we can't fight. With cold sweat streaming from their foreheads, the two of them looked at Erza with their shoulders crossed and said. Erza's gaze scanned the two of them back and forth, and the stern gaze caused more and more cold sweat on their foreheads. After a while, Erza nodded in satisfaction, looked at the two, and said, "That's good." Patting the shoulders of the two, Erza walked forward step by step. Seeing the back of Erza leaving, the two suddenly exhaled heavily. Looking at the other party around him, a look of disgust suddenly appeared in his eyes. Just about to push the opponent away, Erza, who was walking in front, suddenly turned around. The two hurriedly hugged each other tightly and looked at Erza with a smile on their faces. "Erza, what's the matter?" Cold sweat flowed from the heads of the two of them, for fear that Erza would give himself a heavy punch when he turned around. "It's okay. I didn't look for you." Erza raised his eyebrows and looked at Luo Zhen behind the two of them. The two twisted their stiff necks and looked behind them. Luo Zhen didn't know when he appeared behind the two of them, looking at him with a smile on his face. Chapter 78. How about you two fight in front of Erza? The two turned their heads to look behind them, and suddenly saw Luo Zhen standing behind them with a smile on his face. Luo Zhen suddenly appeared behind the two, startling them both suddenly. "Scare me to death, Luo Zhen. When did you come? Why did you suddenly stand behind others?" Startled by Luo Zhen, the two complained all over their faces and immediately stood in a united front and said, dissatisfied, to Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen smiled and stretched out his hand to rub the heads of the two, grinning, and said, "I have been here for a long time, but all you have seen is Erza, and you don't see me at all, which makes me too sad," being rubbed on the head by Luo Zhen. Both of them felt dissatisfied immediately, stretching out his hand to slap Luo Zhen's palm away. Natsu grinned at Luo Zhen and said, "Luo Zhen, since you are back, come and fight me." Looking at Luo Zhen excitedly, his whole body was full of fighting spirit. "Don't make trouble. Come to me again when you beat Gray." Luo Zhen rolled his eyes and walked directly beside Natsu. Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Natsu suddenly became furious, pointed to Gray, who had already taken off his underwear at some point, and said, "This ISPD is no longer my opponent. What are you talking about? Spitfire idiot, you never beat me." Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Gray folded his arms triumphantly and looked at Natsu with a happy face. Hearing Natsu's words suddenly, Gray immediately became unconvinced, and soon the two of them choked. Looking at the noisy two people, Luo Zhen suddenly felt a headache, grabbing a person with one hand, separating them abruptly. "Erza is still here. Why don't you two fight in front of Erza?" After Luo Zhen's words fell, the expressions of the two froze immediately. He turned his stiff neck and looked at the back of Erza not far away. The two of them seemed to have thought of something bad. Their bodies trembled slightly, and they shook their heads hastily. "That's right. So you're not being honest." Luo Zhen rolled his eyes and let go of the arms holding the heads of the two. "Thank you so much, Luo Zhen." "That's right, because thank you." The two breathed a sigh of relief and said to Luo Zhen with a look of gratitude in their eyes. Luo Zhen nodded in satisfaction and said to the two, "Okay, I don't have time to fight with you today. I have something to do with the president." After bidding farewell to the two, Luo Zhen went straight to the groom Carlo on the bar. Makarlov lowered his eyes, noticed Luo Zhen walking over, and raised his head slightly. Came back. Carlos Ma didn't seem surprised at all and asked Luo Zhen and Erza calmly. Luo Zhen nodded and sat down next to the horseman Carlo, with a smile on his face. He took the bottle from Mirajane's hand. "How's the situation this time?" Makarlov glanced at Luo Zhen beside him and then asked Erza with his eyes on him. Erza glanced at Luo Zhen, saw Luo Zhen nodded slightly, and then told everything that happened during the entrustment. Hearing the magic elf power launched by the Magic Senate, Makarlov suddenly raised his head. A flash of surprise flashed in his eyes. "How is it possible? The Senate appointed you to go to this commission. How could it be possible to launch the magic spirit power? However, After seeing Erza's expression, the groom Karloff's expression suddenly became gloomy. "Keep talking." Ma Karloff was sullen, and then let Erza go on. Erza nodded, and then proceeded to tell the whole story about what happened during the entrustment. Because Luo Zhen had told Erza in advance, Erza did not inform Mrs. Carlos about Jalal. After hearing that the members of Grimoire Heart had also come to the Tower of Heaven, Karloff fell silent immediately. Knowing that the Tower of Heaven is also the target of Grimoire Heart, Ma Karloff was thinking about whether there is a connection between the power of Magic Wizard and Grimoire Heart. "You don't need to worry about this matter. Leave it to me." After Erza told Mr. Carlo of everything, Mr. Carlo stroked the beard on his chin with a strange look in his eyes. Glancing at Luo Zhen, who was joking with Mira Jane, Erza nodded and stopped asking. "By the way, after the war with the Ghost Ruler last time, although the Senate has assigned all the responsibilities to the Ghost Ruler, there are members of the council who are not loose with our fairy tale. During this time, when you go out to do commissions, please be gentle with me, especially you Luo Zhen." As he said, Carlos Ma set his eyes on Luo Zhen and said to Luo Zhen with a serious expression. Luo Zhen, who was teasing Mira Jane from the side, covered her mouth and chuckled. Suddenly heard the horseman Carlos calling him by name, and Luo Zhen immediately became dissatisfied. With a displeased expression on his face, he turned his head and said to Ma Carlo, "President, how can you wrong me casually? I haven't caused large-scale damage for a long time. You should tell those two idiots Natsu and Gray about this. Natsu destroyed more than half of the neighborhood with Harjin last time." Luo Zhen pointed dissatisfiedly at Natsu, who was eating and drinking with Happy not far away. Ma Carlos glared at Luo Zhen and said to Luo Zhen, "Don't mention Natsu. You have caused no less damage than Natsu. Your magic power is much stronger than Natsu's." Ma Karloff looked at Luo Zhen righteously and took out a thick stack of complaints from him. "These are all complaints from the Magic Council against our guild, and they are all about you." Looking at the thick complaint in Mrs. Carlos' hand, Luo Zhen immediately looked at each other in dismay. "When did I make so many commissions? Why didn't I know?" Luo Zhen obviously lost all confidence, glanced aside, and muttered. Chapter 79, Carlos Calling Parents. Regarding the complaint, seeing Luo Zhen, who was looking at each other, Ma Karloff smiled coldly, and then put away the complaint in his hand. The next moment, Ma Karloff seemed to remember something. His eyes scanned the surroundings, as if looking for something, and then asked Luo Zhen, "Didn't Ulu come back with you?" Luo Zhen was taken aback for a moment, wondering what the horseman Carlos wanted to do with Ulu. Shaking his head, he said, "Ulu and Zeus are staying at home, saying that they want to have a good rest." "What's the matter, President? Do you have anything to do with Ulu?" Erza on the side was also a little curious, wondering what the groom Carlo wanted to do with Senior Ulu. Ma Karloff was silent for a long time and said to Luo Zhen through gritted teeth, "When you come to the guild next time, bring Ulu with you. Ulu's two good apprentices made me suffer so much." Seeing the way Karloff gritted his teeth, Erza and Luo Zhen became more curious. But Carlos the horse just sat there and sighed. Luo Zhen refused to tell Luo Zhen no matter how much he asked, until Mira Jane on the side covered 797's mouth with a chuckle lying on the bar and waved to Erza and Luo Zhen. The two looked at each other and came to Mira Jane, pointing to Carlo, the horse beside him. He said, "What's wrong with the president? What happened to Gray and Leon?" Mira Jane glanced at Mrs. Carlo with a smile, pointed to Gray, who was fighting not far away, and said, "On the 2 days when you went out to make commissions, Gray also took a commission and went out. Because the entrustment level is not high, Gray can complete it by himself. But when entrusting, he smashed a precious antique in the consignor's house, and the entrusted amount was not enough to compensate the consignor. Plus, Gray spends money lavishly, so he can't save the money at all, so the extra part can only be compensated by the president." Listening to Mira Jane's narration, Erza and Luo Zhen cast pitying glances at the groom Carlo. Since the last war with ghosts, the guild has been completely destroyed, so Ma Karloff used the savings in the guild to rebuild the guild. But because of the aftermath of the battle, Magnolia was affected to varying degrees. The guild savings are not enough. The stable Carlo has used a lot of his own small coffers, and the Go savings over the years are all owned by Fairy Tail. This filled the vacancy, but Carlos's own small coffers were still affected. Now he has to pay Gray another sum of money, which makes Carlos the horse a burst of heartache. Luo Zhen smiled and said to Mira Jane, "But this problem should be a common thing for Gray and the others. Why did the president suddenly become like this? It's not enough." Mira Jane chuckled lightly and continued. After Leon joined the guild last time, he began to actively make commissions, and he was praised by the president at the very beginning. But in the last entrustment, Leon had a conflict with the client because of the content of the entrustment. As a result, the client was beaten up. The client complained to the council, and the president was called to criticize by the council. Pause, and compensated for a sum of medical expenses, and the money was paid by the president himself. The president has nothing to do with the two of them, so he has to find Senior Ulu. After Mira Jane's explanation, the two finally understood why Carlos the horse looked sad. If it is normal to be criticized and complained by the Senate, this is already a common thing for fairy tale mages. Ma Karloff didn't care about this at all, but this has already endangered the small coffers of the stable Carlo, Eft, which immediately made the stable Carlo serious. Luo Zhen looked at Mrs. Carlo sympathetically, but couldn't hold back the grinning corners of his mouth. He gave Luo Zhen a fierce look, and the horseman Carlos had gloomy eyes in his eyes. Suddenly, several familiar figures appeared in Luo Zhen's sight. These people are also staring at Luo Zhen. Seeing Luo Zhen looking at himself and the others, he quickly looked away, as if he noticed Luo Zhen's gaze. Ma Karloff followed Luo Zhen's gaze and looked over. Those familiar figures came into Mrs. Carlo's eyes. The guild they joined the day before yesterday, because their personalities are not bad, so I agreed. Seeing Luo Zhen staring at those figures, Ma Karloff hurriedly explained to Kong Zhen. In the corner of the guild, Gajil and several other figures were sitting there in serious condition. The eyes behind them made a few people feel like thorns on their backs. Luo Zhen nodded, and then took his gaze away from those people. Shrugging his shoulders, he said with a light smile, "Since you have agreed, President, what else can I say? Since they have joined Fairy Tail, we are a family. You are all my children who are treated equally. I hope you can let go of your prejudices." Ma Karloff was silent for a while, looked at Gajil's back, and said to Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen said with a smile, "I can have any prejudices. That is, he should not hate me. I broke his arm back then." It seems to have heard Luo Zhen's voice. Gajil stood up immediately and walked towards Luo Zhen and others step by step. The movement of Gajil walking was not loud, but it quickly attracted the attention of everyone in the guild. All eyes fell on Gajil, looking at Luo Zhen and Gajil with great interest. Coming in front of Luo Zhen, Gajil raised his head with force and looked at Luo Zhen. On Luo Zhen's smiling face, he couldn't see the horror expression at the beginning, and the gentle expression like the big brother next door fell into Gajil's eyes. "When I lost to you, I was inferior in skills, but I never hated you." Gajil braced his head and looked directly into Luo Zhen's eyes. Luo Zhen grinned, stretched out his hand and patted Gajil's shoulder and said, "Since the guild master has agreed for you to join the guild, then I will let go of the impression I had of you, and we will be companions from now on." Chapter 80, I influence them with love. Since the president has agreed that you join Fairy Tail, then I also treat you as a companion. Stretching out his hand and patting Gajil's shoulder, Luo Zhen smiled at Gajil and said, looking at the gentle smile on Luo Zhen's face, Gajil suddenly felt warm in his heart and nodded heavily at Luo Zhen. "Thanks." Looking at the back of Gajil going away, Luo Zhen immediately asked the groom beside him, "Old man, how did you trick them into coming here?" There's another person beside Gajil, Jubia, one of the four elements. Ma Carlos glared at Luo Zhen and muttered, "What is cheating? I used love to influence them." Immediately, Ma Karloff laughed, scratched his head, and said, "It was Juvia who recommended Gajil to me. After I got to know Gajil, I found that this child is not bad in nature, but he has been in an inappropriate environment all year round. It's just been taught badly. I believe that in fairy tale, Gajeel can find a companion who can depend on him for life and can give his back to the other companion with complete trust. Makarlov looked at the taciturn Gajeel in the corner, with a little expectation in his eyes. Seeing the relieved expression of Makarlos, Luo Zhen shrugged and remained silent. A few days later, because of the Tower of Heaven accident, Makarlov hasn't come back from the Magic Council for the past few days, and Luo Zhen is also enjoying himself, so he doesn't go out in the guild for the time being. On this day, Carlos returned to the guild proudly with his hands behind his back. Seeing the noisy crowd, Carlos the horse squeezed into the crowd and saw Luo Zhen not far away. Makarlov jumped up and landed on the table in front of Luo Zhen. He exchanged a glance with Luo Zhen and saw several bottles of wine in front of Luo Zhen. Dissatisfied, he said to Luo Zhen, "Really? When did you start drinking too much?" Luo Zhen put the wine bottle in his hand on the table, put his hands under the horseman Carlo's ribs, and raised it high. The president is back. Being lifted above his head by Luo Zhen, Luo was still spinning in circles. The horseman Carlos was full of anger and yelled at Luo Zhen, "Put me down quickly. I'm the president. Can you show me some respect? You damn it, guy. Put me down." When everyone in the guild saw this scene, no one came up to stop them, and they booed at the two of them. Being lifted up so high by Luo Zhen, the groom was full of shame and anger and kept yelling at Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen laughed and put Carlos' body down on the table. Makarlov gritted his teeth and looked at Luo Zhen and straightened his clothes. Pointing at Luo Zhen's nose, he cursed, "You impolite BD. How could you treat me like this? I am the president of the guild. Can you respect me, old man?" After being reprimanded by Mrs. Carlos, Luo Zhen still had a smile on his face. Instead of showing any sign of repentance, he said to Mrs. Carlos, "Oh, President, don't be so rigid. This is because we have a very close relationship. Good symbol." With a hook on Carlos' shoulder, Luo Zhen said with a smile. Snort. He gave Luo Zhen a vicious look, and Mrs. Carlo knew that Luo Zhen's character was just like that, so he didn't continue to reprimand Luo Zhen. Then he patted his head and slapped away the arm, hooking Luo Zhen on his shoulder. A smile appeared on his face, and Luo Zhen said, "For the mistakes made by the Senate in your entrustment this time, the Senate has already made their remorse, and the compensation for you will come down soon." Luo Zhen frowned and asked curiously, "Compensation? How much is it?" Carlos Ma's face turned dark, and he scolded Luo Zhen with a livid face. "How can the compensation from the council be so vulgar? How can it be money? I don't know what it is until it's compensated, but you can change it and wait." Holding his forehead helplessly, there was nothing he could do about Luo Zhen's maverick Carlo, who was out of character. Really, she was so cute when she was a child. How did she become like this now? Looking at the back of Luo Zhen, who was booing in the crowd, Carlos the horse couldn't help muttering, "Zero. Asking for flowers." President, what did you say?" As if he heard Mr. Carlos murmur, Luo Zhen turned his head with doubts on his face and asked Mr. Carlo curiously, "Nothing." With a dark face, Ma Carlos turned his head and ignored Luo Zhen. Mira Jane on the side couldn't help laughing at the conversation between the two and stood aside with her mouth covered and chuckled. 2 days later, the messenger of the Senate, that is, the frog, was standing at the gate of Fairy Tale. Looking at the guild gate in front of him, the frog swallowed a mouthful of saliva and then squeezed out a human-like smile on his face. Very politely knocked on the door of the guild. Everyone in the guild was instantly attracted by the sound at the door, and they all looked towards the door. In this noisy guild, no one would ever knock on the door here. After everyone saw the frog standing at the door, everyone quieted down and looked at him quietly. The frog squeezed out a smile, scanned the guild, and finally saw Luo Zhen's back in a corner. The frog looked overjoyed and was about to step into the guild immediately. "Stop! Who allowed you in?" Just as the frog's feet were about to land in the guild, an indifferent voice suddenly sounded in the frog's ears. The frog paused, as if the whole person was frozen. The movement came to a halt, and the outstretched foot also stopped in midair. The frog was in a dilemma for a while, neither advancing nor retreating. "What are you doing here?" Just when the frog felt a little sore in his calf, Luo Zhen finally raised his head, with a chill in his indifferent eyes, raised his head to look at the frog and asked, "Master Luo Zhen, I am here on behalf of the council." The frog's face was full of smiles, and he said to Luo Zhen with a flattering smile, "Representing the Senate? If you have something to say, just say it. Don't pull the tiger's skin and pull the banner." Luo Zhen grinned, and there was a chill in his eyes, and the horrible memories at that time suddenly emerged in the frog's heart. Chapter 81, 10 Wizard Saints. Flattering Messenger. Horrible memories came to my mind, and the frog struggled to squeeze out a smile. The last time I came to Fairy Tale, the frog was so scared by Luo Zhen that it fell to the ground. This time the council sent an envoy, but the frog never wanted to come. But unexpectedly, the counselors used the excuse that he had been to Fairy Tale before, and then threw this task to him. Under the pressure of the counselors, the frog had no choice but to accept the task. Before knocking on the door, the frog was still hovering around the door to make his attitude better. But just when he knocked on the door, he was slammed, which made the frog a little bit at a loss. With a difficult smile on the frog's face, he said to Luo Zhen, "Lord Luo Zhen, I am here on behalf of the council." 070. Luo Zhen stared. The chill in his eyes seemed to freeze the frog's body, making him pause. "Representing the council? Don't let this be a big banner with me. If you have something to say, just say it." Luo Zhen smiled coldly, with disdain in his eyes, looked at the frog with a sneer and said, All eyes of the guild fell on the frog. They have never seen the envoys of the council so humble. In the past, when they went to the council, these frogs were all arrogant and looked at people with their noses. Especially when they heard that they were the wizards of Fairy Tale, these frogs were even more disgusted. The frog swallowed and really wanted to talk, but saw Luo Zhen standing up at this moment. With his hands in his pockets, he walked towards him step by step. As soon as the frog stepped back, it quickly retracted the half-stepped foot, standing obediently at the door of Fairy Tale, waiting for Luo Zhen to walk in front of him. As Luo Zhen approached the frog gently, the frog was already sweating coldly. Cold sweat continued to break out on his forehead, and sweat stains were all over his face. "Tell me something, I'm busy." Looking down at the frog, Luo Zhen stood in front of him with his hands in his pockets. With an impatient look in his eyes, he waved at the frog. The frog swallowed and quickly took out a piece of rolled parchment from his arms. Handing the parchment to Luo Zhen respectfully, the frog looked very nervous. "Lord Luo Zhen, the speaker specially asked me to give this item to you." The frog lowered its head and handed the parchment to Luo Zhen with both hands. Looking at the parchment in the frog's hand, Luo Zhen frowned slightly. Then he reached out and took it. Feeling the parchment in his hand being taken by Luo Zhen, the frog breathed a sigh of relief. Luo Zhen opened the parchment and saw a lot of writing on it. Frowning, Luo Zhen finished reading the words on the parchment impatiently. To sum it up, because of the negligence of the council this time, Fairy Tale mages were almost killed or injured. Therefore, the Senate specially gave some compensation to the mage who almost had an accident in the Tower of Heaven incident. Excluding some messy words, the next thing is to make up for it. Erza's compensation is very common. It is a piece of armor that is difficult to collect in the Senate. However, the compensation given to Luo Zhen surprised Luo Zhen. Because Qi Qilian, one of the 10 Wizard Saints, is the thought body of Jalal, the mastermind of this incident in Tower of Heaven. In the last battle with Spectre, Jose was killed by Luo Zhen, and after Qi Qilian disappeared, 2 positions became vacant for 10 Wizard Saints. In view of Luo Zhen's strength and great contribution to the magic world, the council awarded Luo Zhen the title of 10 Wizard Saints. Gone. After reading the parchment in his hand, Luo Zhen frowned and asked the frog in front of him, "This is what the speaker asked me to bring together." Seeing Luo Zhen frowning, the frog's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly called the soldiers of the Senate behind him. I saw a wooden box in the soldier's hand. The box seemed to be very heavy, and everyone panted and put the wooden box on the ground. As the frog opened the wooden box, a radiant armor appeared in the wooden box. This is a piece of armor collected by the council. It may be brought by the speaker. The frog quickly stood beside the tall wooden box, introducing the armor to Luo Zhen. Erza, try it. Luo Zhen ignored the frog and pulled Erza to the armor. I saw Erza put his palm on the armor, and a magic circle lit up in the center of the armor. In an instant, the radiant armor appeared on Erza's body. As the armor was put on, Erza suddenly felt a powerful force surging in his body. This armor can greatly increase the user's strength and defense, and it can be greatly improved in close hand-to-hand combat. The frog stood beside the two obsequiously, rubbing his hands, and said to the two. Luo Zhen turned his head and said to the people behind him, "Stay away." Without hesitation, everyone quickly retreated behind them. The frog was slightly taken aback, not knowing what Luo Zhen meant. But the next moment, the frog regained his composure and hurriedly retreated into the distance. "Come on, Erza, punch me," with all his might. Luo Zhen put on a good pose, grinned at Erza, and said. Erza nodded without hesitation. "Gather up, punch." There was a violent explosion. I saw Erza's heavy punch hit 1.3 Luo Zhen's chest. Although Luo Zhen's footsteps did not move, the smoke and dust aroused filled the entire square with smoke and dust. When the smoke cleared, Luo Zhen's eyes were slightly surprised. Can enhance so much power? Although this punch failed to break Luo Zhen's defense, it made Luo Zhen feel a little pain. The frog came forward, licking his face, and said to Luo Zhen, "This is the armor made by the most outstanding blacksmith in the council, and the materials used are also very rare. There are many magic circles carved inside the armor. It is a piece of armor, a very powerful piece of armor." Luo Zhen nodded and saw joy in Erza's eyes. "What about mine?" Chapter 82 Soldiers come to block. Water comes to cover. What about mine? Erza seemed quite satisfied with the armor compensated by the Senate. Seeing Erza's loving eyes, Luo Zhen turned his head and suddenly asked the frog. The frog was taken aback for a moment, and the face that was still smiling suddenly froze on it. The frog looked dazed, squeezed out an ugly smile at Luo Zhen, and stammered, "Luo, Master Luo Zhen, the speaker and members of the council only asked me to bring this piece of armor. I do not know." The frog's legs were weak, and he said to Luo Zhen with a crying face. Looking at Luo Zhen's gradually sinking face, the frog was trembling all over. The soldiers of the Senate looked at each other and hurried away from Luo Zhen. Although they don't know why the envoys of the council are so afraid of the mage in front of them, but they are not fools to be able to serve in the Senate. Naturally, it can be seen that the man in front of him is terrifying, and he can make the envoys of the council so humble. Luo Zhen's gradually sinking face appeared in the eyes of the frog, and the frog became even more frightened. 04 hastily explained to Luo Zhen, "Before I set off, the speaker specially asked me to ask you to open this parchment yourself, and the speaker must write all your rewards on it." The frog was so emotional that he quickly raised his head and said to Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen spread out the parchment and placed it in front of the frog, and said with a sneer, "The reward that your speaker mentioned is a false title of 10 Wizard Saints?" Although the title of 10 Wizard Saints is good, in Luo Zhen's eyes, it is not as practical as some substantial rewards. The surrounding guild idioms naturally heard what Luo Zhen said. There was a sudden exclamation. "What? The Senate actually made Luo Zhen a 10 Wizard Saints? Then don't our guild have 2 10 Wizard Saints? Great! Fairy Tale is the strongest wizard guild in Fiori Kingdom." Everyone looked at Luo Zhen's back with fiery eyes. Even Gray and Natsu, the 2 noisy guys, were not making any noise at this moment, and looked at Luo Zhen's back excitedly. "It's so strong. Mr. Luo Zhen became 10 Wizard Saints at such a young age." Lucy clasped her hands together, looking at Luo Zhen's back with admiration in her eyes. The 2 big eyes shone like stars, looking at Luo Zhen excitedly. "Mira Jane, did you hear? Brother Luo Zhen is the great wizard of Shangtian. The same is true for Li Sana." Looking at Luo Zhen's back in admiration, shaking Mira Jane's arm beside her. Mira Jane chuckled, holding Lisana's tender little hand, Her blurred eyes just looked at Luo Zhen quietly. Everyone in the guild reacted differently, but they were all happy for Luo Zhen. Only the person concerned now has a face full of frost, staring at the frog with a building in his eyes. The frog trembled all over and quickly squeezed out a smile and said to Luo Zhen, "Congratulations, Master Luo Zhen. Became 10 wizard saints. Don't get me wrong, this stuff sent me away. I almost died in the Tower of Heaven." Luo Zhen sneered and threw the parchment in his hand on the frog's face. The frog was slightly taken aback, looking at Luo Zhen's back as he turned and left. Luo Zhen's last words echoed in his mind. "Go back and tell your speaker, if this is your sincerity, I will not accept it. And in the future, don't try to find me in the matter of your senate." This sentence also represents fairy tale. While speaking, Carlos Ma was standing beside Luo Zhen with his arms folded. But after hearing Luo Zhen's words, Mrs. Ma Carlos did not make a sound at all, as if he had already agreed with Luo Zhen's words just now. The deflated frog stretched out his hand to keep Luo Zhen, but a bitter smile appeared on his face when he thought of the cruel words that Luo Zhen put down at the end. "Master Speaker, you really gave me a difficult problem." The frog turned back bitterly and glanced at the gate of the Fairy Tale Guild. Then he turned around and left here, taking the parchment with him at the same time. Back in the guild, Luo Zhen's frosty face disappeared, and a gentle smile appeared on his face. Seeing Luo Zhen showing his original appearance, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. "Luo Zhen, is it really all right for you to treat the emissary of the Senate like that?" Mira Jane came to Luo Zhen's side with worry in her eyes and asked Luo Zhen worriedly. Luo Zhen grinned and said to Mira Jane with a light smile, "Don't worry, this time the council made a mistake first. Besides, people from the Dark Guild have infiltrated the council, and they have become 10 wizard saints and counselor-level existences. They are still afraid of shame. Thought I could feed myself with a 10 wizard saints title." Luo Zhen smiled coldly, with disdain for the 250 House of Representatives in his eyes. "But if you treat the envoys of the Senate like this now, aren't you afraid that they will retaliate against you in the future?" Mira Jane was silent for a while, then said to Luo Zhen worriedly, "Soldiers come to block, water comes to cover. Don't worry, let alone get revenge on me. What kind of existence do they have to use?" Luo Zhen reached out and rubbed Mira Jane's long silver hair and said with a light smile. Nodding, the worry in Mira Jane's eyes dissipated a little. "You are right, Luo Zhen's strength is already that strong. What's more, there is Fairy Tale standing behind Luo Zhen. Luo Zhen protects everyone, and everyone can stand behind Luo Zhen and support him." And the president just stood there from the beginning to the end, but he didn't interrupt Luo Zhen's words. Obviously also acquiesced to Luo Zhen's behavior just now. Feeling the warmth above her head, Mira Jane pouted, but her eyes were filled with happiness. Just then, a figure appeared at the door. With the camera in hand, he strode into the guild. "Excuse me, is Chairman Carlos here?" The visitor looked a little nervous, scanning the guild with excited eyes. Chapter 83, I want to refute the rumor. It's not a rumor. "Excuse me, is Chairman Carlos here?" The person who came was holding a camera, and his eyes were constantly scanning the guild. Looking at the people in the guild, his eyes were full of excitement. "Oh, I'm Carlo the horse. Who are you?" Ma Karloff tilted his head and looked at the young man with some doubts. "Hi. Hello. I'm a reporter from Soshara Weekly, and I'm here to pay a special visit to Fairy Tale." The young man with yellow hair was very excited after seeing the Horseman Carlo, and hurried to the Horseman Carlo. "Oh, I remembered before your weekly magazine said that someone would come to the guild for interviews. I didn't expect you to come so soon." Looking at the young man in front of him, Ma Karloff suddenly realized. "Yes, originally the newspaper office planned to come for a while, but I was so curious about Fairy Tale, so I applied to the newspaper office and came to Fairy Tale ahead of schedule." The young man danced and danced, excited to see everyone coming and going around him. "That's great, let's get started." Ma Karloff nodded and led the yellow-haired young man into the guild. "Everyone, this is a reporter from Soshara Weekly. Today is a special interview with Fairy Tale, so please cooperate well. Everyone in the guild immediately sat up from their chairs when they heard Mr. Carlos' words, especially Lucy, holding her face and screaming. What? Is that so, Shara? Is that the weekly magazine that is regularly updated every Wednesday, introducing the latest magic and the most popular wizards? With excitement in her eyes, Lucy rushed to the front of the yellow hair. Yes, it's our newspaper office. Looking at the blonde girl in front of him, the young man was obviously taken aback, stepped back quickly, and said with a smile on his face, "Today I want to make a special about Fairy Tale, so I take the liberty to interrupt, and I hope you will forgive me." The young man scanned the crowd, took a step back, and bowed softly to the crowd. "No problem, no problem." At this time, Lucy was very excited, running around in the guild with her cheeks flushed. Then he suddenly remembered something, turned around, and rushed out of the guild. Seeing the back of Lucy going away, everyone immediately looked at each other in blank dismay. What's wrong with this lady? Looking at the back of Lucy running away, the young man was sweating and asked involuntarily, "Oh, forget about that guy. That's what that guy is." Natsu did not know when to appear behind the young man, hooked the young man's shoulders, and put his cheek in front of him. "It's you? Why do you write me so badly every time?" "UBD." Natsu leaned forward, his foreheads were already touching, and asked the young man. "Yes." The young man straightened his chest, his eyes full of pride. "Every time I write about what I destroyed and what I destroyed, it's so annoying." Natsu was full of anger, grabbed the yellow-haired reporter in front of him by the collar, and was about to lead him out of the guild. But at the moment of Natsu's action, Erza suddenly stood in front of Natsu and grabbed Natsu's wrist. The terrifying coercion made Natsu stop immediately, looking at Erza covered in cold sweat. Squeezing out a smile, Natsu asked Erza tremblingly, "Erza, what's the matter?" "Natsu, this gentleman is our guest. How can you treat a guest like this?" Erza stared straight at Natsu with sharp eyes. "Miss Erza, are you Miss Erza, who is known as the Fairy Queen?" At this time, the reporter on the side suddenly became excited, dancing and looking at Erza beside him. "Yes, I am Erza." Released from Natsu's wrist, Erza folded his arms with a faint smile on his face. "I like you so much. Can you sign me?" The reporter took out a pen and paper from behind and handed it to Erza, as if he had succeeded in chasing a star. Erza was taken aback, then smiled and said, "Of course it's okay." As he spoke, he signed his name on the paper. Looking at Erza's name on the paper, the reporter carefully put it in the backpack behind him. "Miss Erza, I heard that there have been rumors that you are in a relationship with Mr. Luo Zhen, the King of Souls in the same guild. What do you think of it?" There was expectation in the reporter's eyes, wanting to hear Erza refute the rumors himself. Who would have thought that Erza frowned slightly when she heard this sentence? The next moment, the reporter heard Erza continue to say, "Let me say first, this is not a rumor. I am in a relationship with Luo Zhen." Erza crossed his arms and pointed to Luo Zhen, who was drinking not far away. Seeing that he was pointing at himself, I really didn't know what to do. Pointing to himself with his finger, he tilted his head at Erza, wondering. And the reporter's whole body has been down in place, and the hand that recorded something on the paper has begun to tremble. Really? Miss Erza." The reporter forced a smile, squeezed a smile, and asked Erza again. "That's right. I wanted to hear that Erza refused personally, but this sentence of willing to leave made the reporter very sad. Lees. Wiping the tears from the corners of his eyes, the reporter then said with a forced smile, "Then, can you please tell me, Ms. Erza, what kind of person Mr. Luo Zhen is?" Mentioning Luo Zhen, Erza's face was filled with a happy smile. Said, "Luo Zhen is a very gentle person and a very independent person who loves his companions." Seeing the happy expression on Erza's face, the reporter suddenly felt heartbroken. Obviously just succeeded in chasing stars. How come I feel like my dream is shattered? Sighing heavily, the reporter then walked toward the next person not far away. Mira Jane. "Hi, Miss Mira Jane, long time no see." The reporter swept away the haze before, with a smile on his face that he thought was handsome, and greeted Mira Jane in the bar with a smile. Chapter 84: Dragon Slayers Super Showdown. Miss Mira Jane, it's been a long time. It's so cool. The yellow-haired reporter came in front of Mira Jane, swept away the haze just now, and looked at Mira Jane with a confident smile. Mr. Jason, long time no see. With a gentle smile on Mira Jane's face, she waved to the yellow-haired reporter. Miss Mira Jane is so beautiful when she smiles. Is Miss Mira Jane's living room coming to be the cover of this special this time? It's so cool. The yellow-haired reporter raised his camera and took pictures of Mira Jane from various angles. Of course it's fine. Mira Jane tilted her head and smiled softly, with beautiful scenery between every frown and smile. Jason ran around the guild and soon rushed to Happy, excitedly asked Happy, "Happy, can I ask why you belong to Blue?" "Hey, because we are cats." Happy put her hands on her hips, looked up at Jason, and said. After a while, Jason's eyes scanned the guild and suddenly looked forward. A figure is sitting in a corner drinking. Jason's eyes lit up, and he rushed straight to the figure in the corner. It's Gray. Gray's true self is there. Jason's eyes lit up 003, and he strode directly towards the figure in the corner. Raising his head lazily, Gray glanced at the noisy yellow hair standing beside him and looked at him with a displeased face. I'm a reporter for the weekly Soshara." "Gray, why do you always take your clothes off?" Holding a pen and paper in his hand, he interviewed Gray with excited eyes. "I don't have it." "UBD, why do you take what I said as a statement?" Upon hearing this, Gray immediately became furious, standing on a chair and yelling at Jason. "Cool. So cool. Gray, your pants are off again." Jason's eyes lit up, and he took the camera and began to record the scene in front of him. Damn it. When? Gray's complexion changed, and he quickly blocked his lower body. Looking at the back of Jason who left, Gray gritted his teeth with hatred. "It's UBD who ruined my reputation by scribbling in the weekly magazine." "Haha, pervert Gray." Not far away, Natsu was looking at the angry Gray with a mocking face. Afbi. Hearing Natsu's ridicule, Gray stood up angrily, pointed at Natsu and shouted, "What right do you have to say about me? Destroyer, fire-breathing idiot. Who are you calling a saboteur?" Perverted Gray. If the two disagreed, they would fight in the guild, and if they watched, they would fight. Not far away, Erza suddenly coughed, and the two of them stopped immediately. "I'll let you go just once, BD. Who's afraid of whom? Sooner or later I'll beat you up, BD Gray." The two separated in disdain and walked towards the back step by step. Seeing the two of them stop, Jason on the side was a little disappointed and put down the camera in his hand. Jason was disappointed for not being able to see the battle between Fairy Tail, Fire Dragon, and Gray. But soon, he found other people and started asking various questions. "Alfman, what does it mean to be manly?" "Man, Kana, may I ask how much alcohol do you drink a day?" "Oh, stop asking so many questions. Sit down and have a drink with me." "Wakaba, Macau, are you two middle-aged wretched uncles from Fairy Tail?" "UBD, don't write scribbles in the weekly magazine. We're middle-aged charmers, bastards." Going around, the paper in Jason's hand was already filled with handwriting. Suddenly, there was a burst of music in the guild. I saw Gajeel holding an electric guitar and standing on the stage not far away. "In this world where honest people suffer, I'm afraid you have been suffering all the time, which means that honest people are the ones who suffer." "Friends, did you hear that?" While talking, Gajeel was still swinging the electric guitar in his hand, and the trembling electric sound echoed in the guild. "Cool. So cool. It's Gajeel the Iron Dragon." Seeing Gajeel's figure, Jason rushed to the stage excitedly. "Stop him. Stop Gajeel. Don't let him talk." "Shut up, Ajiru." Seeing Gajeel holding an electric guitar, the expressions of everyone in the guild suddenly changed, and they rushed forward to stop Gajeel. "It's so noisy, Gajeel. You're singing even though you're out of tune." At this moment, Natsu suddenly rushed onto the stage and kicked Gajeel's, sending him flying. Gajeel stood up and looked angrily at Natsu, who was triumphantly crossing his arms on the stage. "BD Fire Dragon, I haven't sung yet." As he spoke, his arms stretched out and turned into an iron rod, and he punched Natsu directly on the cheek. "Let me sing happily. Fire Dragon, When the two disagreed, they fought in the guild, with flames flying and iron flying. You punched me and kicked and attacked each other continuously. Jason stood aside, looking at the two in the battle with bright eyes. Cool. So cool. Unexpectedly, I actually saw the super sexy duel between Dragon Slayers because it was so cool. Jason raised the camera in his hand and took pictures of the two from all directions. Arms are trembling a little. You two stop now. Suddenly, Gajil's arm extended and smashed the wine bottle in the hand of Luo Zhen, who was drinking beside him. The guild suddenly fell into silence. Everyone looked at the two in the battle with sympathy. Gajil and Natsu didn't know what happened at this time. They were still punching each other constantly. Suddenly, you came to the person's side with a sullen face. A heavy punch hit the heads of the two of them. You two bastards. If you want to fight, at least don't disturb others. Knocking the two of them to the ground with one punch, Luo Zhen clapped his hands and turned his head away as if nothing happened. Cool. So cool. Is this the strength of the soul, King Luo Zhen? It's so cool. The yellow-haired reporter danced and rushed towards Luo Zhen's direction with excited eyes. Chapter 85. Stop calling me by that name. Cool. So cool. Is this the strength of the King of Souls? Finally seeing the real King of Soul with my own eyes, it's so cool. Jason looked excited and rushed towards Luo Zhen dancing. Suddenly, Luo Zhen, who had just sat down, turned his head and stared at Jason's figure. Being stared at so directly by Luo Zhen, Jason suddenly felt as if he was being stared at by a wild beast. With a smile on his excited face, he waved to Luo Zhen. Is that the nickname your kid gave me? Luo Zhen stared at Jason quietly, and after a long time, he opened his mouth quietly, staring at Jason with deep eyes and asked. Jason swallowed. With an excited smile on his face, he nodded proudly and said, It's me. How about this title? It's so cool. Luo Zhen stood up suddenly, and that tall body appeared in front of Jason in an instant. Yu stared at Jason. Sighing, a little helplessness appeared in Fei Jin's eyes. He said to Jason, In your weekly magazine, can you stop calling me by such a shameful title? Jason was taken aback, but seeing Luo Zhen's quiet gaze, Jason nodded quickly and replied, No problem. A look of satisfaction flashed in Luo Zhen's eyes, and he patted Jason on the shoulder. Satisfied, he said, That's fine. Just report my name when you come to Fairy Tale. Feeling the strength on his shoulders, Jason forced a smile on his face and nodded to Luo Zhen with a smile. After Luo Zhen took the palm from his shoulder, Jason immediately breathed a sigh of relief and secretly reached out and rubbed his shoulder. Ling, Luo Zhen, can I ask you a few questions? Seeing Luo Zhen sitting back in the corner, Jason really wanted to speak. Suddenly stared at by Luo Zhen's cold eyes, he quickly changed his words. Go ahead, Luo Zhen nodded and pointed to the seat opposite for Jason to sit down. Jason was very emotional, sitting in front of Luo Zhen, and asked Luo Zhen, Excuse me, are you dating Erza now? For some reason, Jason had already brought honorifics when asking questions, and looked at Luo Zhen expectantly and asked, Yes. Without hesitation, Luo Zhen nodded decisively and replied. Jason's heart shuddered, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. Then can you explain in detail how you met Erza? Jason took a deep breath, looked squarely at the gap between himself and Luo Zhen, and asked Luo Zhen helplessly. Erza and I are childhood sweethearts. We grew up together since childhood. Luo Zhen smiled and glanced at the figure who was scolding Natsu Gajil in the distance, with a gentle smile on his face. Cool, so we knew each other when we were kids. Jason's eyes lit up, and he was about to continue asking Luo Zhen questions. But this time, Luo Zhen waved at Jason. Our president seems to be waiting for you to interview him. You should ask him. Looking at Jason's eyes full of gossip, Luo Zhen decisively refused Jason's interview. Although Jason was a little reconciled, he still raised his camera and took several photos of Luo Zhen. He left unwillingly and came to the horse Carlo. Jason returned to his previous energetic state and stood in front of Ma Karloff with a smile on his face, asking questions. President Carlos Ma, What is the ambition of the guild? Jason stood in front of Carlos the horse with an excited face and asked. Of course, the heart of love and justice strives for perfection. Ma Karloff propped up his back and said with a smile to Jason, It's too fake. Happy on the side seemed to see that Carlos the groom was pretending to be calm and spread his hands aside and complained. Happy. Happy's words made the corner of Mrs. Carlo's mouth twitch, and he hugged Happy in his arms and ravaged him. Natsu, help me. Being hugged by the horseman Carlos and rubbed like a puppet, Happy showed a desperate look and shouted for help to Natsu in the distance. But at this time, Natsu was standing in front of Erza with his head bowed obediently, and Gajil was also obediently standing aside. Zero, seeking flowers. Erza folded his arms and was preaching to the two with a serious face. Happy's cries for help were not heard at all. It wasn't until Carlo, the horseman, had a good time sucking the cat that he released Happy from his arms. Happy, who left, was devastated. As if she had been ruined, her eyes were blank, and she staggered towards the corner. Jason was still running around in the guild, interviewing many members of the guild. At this moment, the gate of the guild suddenly opened. Several figures appeared at the door of the guild. I saw a man wearing a woolen coat with a lightning-like earphone on his ear, scanning the guild with a rebellious expression. Lager thus. Cool. I didn't expect to meet Legasis. Jason's eyes lit up, and he rushed towards Legersis excitedly. Before Jason came in front of Legasis, he saw his brow wrinkled. Seeing Jason rushing towards him, Legersis knocked him to the ground with a punch. Who is this person? Legersis frowned, looked at Jason, who had fainted on the ground, and questioned the groom, Carlo, who was not far away. The weekly reporter who came to interview the guild today. Why did you knock him out? The blue veins on Ma Karloff's forehead bulged. Watching Jason, who was stunned, he yelled at Legersis. Cut, boring. Just do something completely pointless. Legersis smiled coldly, glanced at the groom Carlo in front of him, and walked straight past him. Just as Legersis walked into the guild, he suddenly stopped beside a person. Is this guy the brat who troubled my guild? Legersis looked down at Gajil on the side, without any emotion in his eyes. Hey, lager us. What do you want to do? Gajil is now a companion who joined Fairy Tale. Erza's expression froze, and he stood in front of Gajil, yelling Daoshi at Legasis with a serious expression. Chapter 86. You are the man I recognize. Lager thus. This guy is already a companion who joined Fairy Tale. What do you want? Erza seemed to see what Legosis was going to do, and stood in front of Gajil with a serious face, and softly shouted at Legosis. Who would have thought that Erza's words seemed to have angered Legersis? Lightning surged all over his body. He looked at Gajil coldly and said with a sneer, That stinky old man, and because he was not killed, he simply accepted him as a companion. That's why Fairy Tale turned into this now. That's how people look down on you. Legersis's body was filled with thunder and lightning, and there was a furious look in his eyes. As Legersis's voice fell, a thunderbolt instantly appeared in the guild out of thin air. 890 made a loud explosion and blasted directly towards Gajil's figure. The violent thunder bombarded Gajil's body continuously, and Gajil's complexion became extremely ferocious for a while. Countless violent thunderbolts continuously poured into Gajil's body in various parts of the body, as if they wanted to completely smash Gajil's heart in an instant. Painful roars came out of Gajil's mouth. Legersis's face was gloomy, and he stared fiercely at Erza in front of him. Erza, don't stand in front of me. I'm afraid I'll kill you if I'm not careful. There was a violent, murderous intent in Legertha's eyes, and Delai's breath kept gushing out of Legertha's body. Lagertha, stop it. Gajil is a partner of the guild. This is the meaning of the president. Don't you want to go against the meaning of the president? A white light flashed on Erza's body, and a yellow armor appeared on Erza's body. The Thunder Emperor's armor. Holding a long gun, Erza stared solemnly at Legosis, who was a head taller than him. Erza, I have never fought with you before. Let me see you under the protection of Luo Zhen. Let me see your strength. Legersis grinned, with violent killing intent flashing in his eyes. Thunder surged from his body, and he instantly attacked Erza. The next moment, Erza didn't even see Legasis clearly. A shining fist has appeared in front of Erza. But this fist stopped right in front of Erza's eyes, and it was difficult to go any further. I saw Luo Zhen appearing in front of Erza at some unknown time, with a gloomy complexion grabbing Legos's wrist. Lagerdas, I don't mind the trouble you want to find the president, but you shouldn't point your fist at Erza. Luo Zhen raised his head. A pair of indifferent eyes flashed with violent killing intent. The domineering aura surged on his body, and that terrifying aura instantly swept across the entire guild. Under the suppression of domineering color, everyone was overwhelmed by this terrifying aura. He looked in horror at the figure standing at the door, grabbing Legersis' wrist. Even Legasis had a heavy complexion at this moment, as if his body was being weighed down by a mountain. "Ha, Luo Zhen. Come on, let's fight. Let me see how far your strength has come after all these years." Legersis laughed wildly, looking at Luo Zhen excitedly. The thunder on his body erupted continuously, like thunder snakes scurrying across Legasis' body. Thunder Dragon's fist. With a roar, the thunder on his body condensed on Legersis' fist. Accompanied by a heavy punch, it directly hit Luo Zhen's chest. There was a violent explosion, and thunder and lightning ran wildly in the guild. A puff of smoke was stirred up, and Erza hurriedly shouted, "Luo Zhen, are you okay? Lagerthus, if you hurt Luo Zhen, I will definitely kill you." As the smoke and dust caused by the lightning dispersed, a figure stood motionless in front of Legasis. The fist wrapped in the power of thunder hit Luo Zhen's chest heavily, but it didn't hurt Luo Zhen at all. The sullen Luo Zhen grinned, and there was a bit of ferocity under the cold smile. "Lagerthus, your fist is still the same as before. It's limp and has no strength at all." After the words fell, Luo Zhen threw a heavy punch towards Legersis. Legersis wanted to raise his arm to block the punch, but he couldn't keep up with Luo Zhen's speed at all. The moment his arm was just raised, Luo Zhen's fist had already slammed heavily on Legersis' chest. With a violent explosion, a yellow figure flew upside down. On the square at the entrance of the Fairy Tale Guild, a figure flew out of the guild in an instant. It slammed heavily on the fountain outside. The fountain shattered, and the water continuously sprayed out on the smashed spring. Legersis stood up holding the gravel on the ground, clutching his chest. The severe pain made Legersis a little out of breath. This punch directly broke at least 3 of Legersis' ribs. Coughing up blood, Legersis raised his arm and wiped it at the corner of his mouth. "Come on, Luo Zhen, kill me. In this guild, you're one of the few people I recognize. You're qualified to inherit Fairy Tale. Under your leadership, Fairy Tale will be stronger than it is now." There was madness in Legersis' eyes. Enduring the 0.1 severe pain in his chest, he yelled at Luo Zhen, who was walking towards the outside of the guild step by step. Arriving in front of Legersis, Luo Zhen looked down at the mad-looking Legersis from above. There was no emotion in his eyes, and he looked at the crazy man in front of him indifferently. "What are you waiting for? I violated the old man's wishes. You should kill me, and then ask the old man for credit. Only you are qualified to inherit this guild." Legersis stared fiercely at Luo Zhen and roared fiercely. Boom! Luo Zhen clenched his fist and suddenly punched Legersis. Accompanied by the sound of the sonic boom, a burst of smoke and dust enveloped both of them. Luo Zhen. Lagerus. Chapter 87. If you want to change everything, become the president. The aroused smoke and dust enveloped Luo Zhen and Luo Zhen's figures. The terrifying power directly shattered the ground of the square at the entrance of Fairy Tale, and the cracks continued to spread. Everyone's footsteps have been blocked by the huge crack that appeared in front of them, and the smoke and dust aroused completely covered everyone's sight. The 3 thunder gods looked at each other, quickly jumped up from the entrance of Fairy Tale, and rushed straight into the smoke and dust. Luo Zhen's punch won't kill Legasis Louis. As the 3 of them rushed into the smoke, Erza and Lisena followed closely behind and rushed in. When the smoke cleared, Erza and others finally saw Luo Zhen and Legosis on the edge of the fountain. At this moment, Lagos's was slumped to the ground, and Luo Zhen was squatting in front of Lagos's. The outstretched fist seemed to land on Lagos's chest. Erza's heart tightened, for fear that Luo Zhen's impulse would beat Lagos's to death. He hurriedly rushed towards Luo Zhen's back. Taking a closer look, Luo Zhen's punch didn't land on Lagos's body. Instead, he punched heavily on the ground in front of Lagos's 07. Terrifying strange force smashed the ground, and countless cracks spread around under Luo Zhen's fist. Luo Zhen, are you okay? Worryingly came to Luo Zhen's side, took a look at Lagos's who was lying on the ground. Looking at Luo Zhen with dull eyes, Lisana and Erza asked Luo Zhen with some worry. Luo Zhen grinned, clapped his palms, and stood up. Don't worry. What's the matter? Luo Zhen stretched out his hand and rubbed the heads of the two, then turned his head and glanced at Lagos's with dull eyes. Lagardus, why live in the eyes of others? The three thunder gods came to Lagos's and worriedly checked Lagos's injuries. When Luo Zhen turned his head and left, he said to Lagos's, you could deny the president's intentions, and you can have your own goals, but you should not attack the guildmates. The president has agreed to Gajil join Fairy Tail. Then he is a member of Fairy Tail. If you're not convinced, you can fight to be the next president, and you can do whatever you want by then. After speaking, Luo Zhen took Erza and Lisana and turned around and left. Looking at the back of Luo Zhen leaving, a sharp light suddenly appeared in Lagos's eyes. Will you become the president of Fairy Tail? Seeing Luo Zhen's back gradually disappearing from sight, Lagos muttered to himself. With dried blood on the corners of their mouths, several members of the Thunder God group asked worriedly beside Lagos's, Lagos, what's wrong with you? Are you seriously injured? Quick, take Lagos to the hospital. No, I'm fine. Lagos coughed out a mouthful of blood, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and then helped Freed stand up. Let's go. Glancing blankly at the Fairy Tail Guild in front of him, Lagos left in the distance with the Thunder Gods after a long silence. In the guild, Ma Karloff watched Luo Zhen return to the guild and immediately sighed deeply. Turning his head and glanced at the outside of the guild, he saw Lagos's back leaving towards the distance. A look of helplessness flashed in Ma Karloff's eyes. Ma Karloff came to Gajil, who was bombarded by thunder, and asked Gajil, are you all right? Are you in good health? Gajil exhaled a puff of black smoke and stood up after shaking his head. There was pain all over his body, but Gajil managed a smile on his face. President, I'm fine. I'll get it back from that guy myself. Gajil grinned, watching the back of Lagos's leaving, with high fighting spirit in his eyes. Ma Carlos didn't answer, stretched out his hand and patted the back of Gajil's hand, and walked towards the outside of the guild with his hands behind his back. President, where are you going? Seeing the back of Mr. Carlo about to leave, everyone was a little puzzled. Erza quickly shouted at Mr. Carlo. Carlos raised his arm and waved it, and said without looking back, I'm going out for a walk. After hearing Ma Karloff's words, everyone stopped asking. After all, something like this happened in the guild. His grandson didn't recognize his ideas at all, and even fought against the members of the guild. This troubled Carlos Ma, who was the president for a while. With the end of this farce, the previous uproar in the guild resumed. Groups of people were chatting in the guild, but everyone seemed to have something on their minds. Different thoughts could be seen on everyone's faces. Luo Zhen was sitting on the bar counter silently. Erza and Lisana were sitting beside Luo Zhen, but they didn't know what to say to Luo Zhen. At this time, Mira Jane came to Luo Zhen with a tray, put the tray on the bar, and then stood behind Luo Zhen with her chin. Nah, do you think the president will punish Lagos? Mira Jane stood behind Luo Zhen with some curiosity, looked at the empty door, and asked Luo Zhen and Erza. Erza continued to shake his head, saying that he is the grandson of the president. But Lagos violated the guild's treaty again and attacked his companions in the guild. This is no ordinary slapstick. Lagardus really wanted to kill Gajil. Jason's weekly interview was interrupted because of Lagurthus' presence. Mira Jane got someone to take Jason, who was knocked out by Lagardus, to the hospital. Lucy just came back at this time, and the beautifully dressed Lucy returned to the guild. In my mind, I was still fantasizing that I was caught by Jason at a glance, and then became the cover girl of the weekly magazine. Then there is money to pay the rent. He walked into the guild happily, but found that everyone in the guild was silent. Even Natsu and Gray, who were usually the loudest, sat quietly by the side without saying a word. "Miss Mira Jane, what's going on, everyone?" Lucy was a little puzzled and came to the bar with a nervous heart and asked Mira Jane in a low voice. Chapter 88, Curiosity Will Kill the Cat. How come? This is too much. Telling Lucy what happened loudly just now, Lucy covered her mouth in surprise, complaining indignantly for the injured Gajeel. Although Lucy was a little surprised that Gajeel joined the guild at first, but after the president agreed. At the beginning, Natsu and Gray were very resistant to Gajeel's joining the guild, but after the horseman Carlos agreed, the two accepted it silently. But Lucy didn't expect that Lagosas, who just came back, would fight Gajeel. Since joining the guild, Lucy has never seen Lager thus, but only heard about this fairy tale S-class mage from Natsu and Gray. Obviously, Luo Zhen and Erza are also level 5 mages, but they're not so bad. Lucy was aggrieved and complained to Mira Jane on the side. Mira Jane smiled and glanced at Luo Zhen beside her. He leaned into Lucy's ear and said to Lucy, "Don't look at the mature appearance of Luo Zhen now." When he first joined the guild, Luo Zhen was a noisy brat. Hearing Mira Jane's words, Lucy was a little surprised. At the same time, it also aroused the gossip in Lucy's heart. With a little excitement in his eyes, he leaned in front of Mira Jane and asked Mira Jane, "Can you tell me about Luo Zhen? I really want to know." There was excitement in Lucy's eyes, and the heart of Melons was surging wildly. Mira Jane nodded her forehead with her fingers and suddenly fell to gaze, staring at the two of them. The two turned their heads to look in Luo Zhen's direction at the same time. I saw that Luo Zhen was staring at the two of them without knowing when, and his faint eyes were just looking at him quietly. Lucy suddenly shivered all over and grinned at Luo Zhen. "Luo, Mr. Luo Zhen, good morning." Stared at by Luo Zhen's gloomy gaze, Lucy became completely flustered and greeted Lucy with a flustered expression. Lucy, who was incoherent, was shaking all over, as if a child who did something wrong was caught by an adult. "Lucy, if you are too curious, it will kill the cat." Luo Zhen stared at Lucy quietly, and a faint voice came out of Luo Zhen's mouth. Suddenly, Lucy, who was already terrified, trembled all over and quickly stood upright in front of Luo Zhen. "Sorry, Mr. Luo Zhen." The flustered Lucy forced a smile on her face, stood straight in front of Luo Zhen, and quickly bowed to Luo Zhen to apologize. Looking at Lucy, who seemed to be scared, Luo Zhen suddenly laughed and said, "I'm just kidding you." Luo Zhen stretched out his hand and patted Lucy's shoulder, making Lucy's body tremble, which was already terrified. He didn't listen to Luo Zhen's words at all and kept murmuring in his heart, "Tuti, tuti, tuti. Am I going to die here? Hey, don't be so scared." Luo Zhen seemed to feel the trembling of Lucy in front of him and shouted at Lucy with a face full of black lines. Lucy, who suddenly came to his senses, heard Luo Zhen's words, and tears flowed from his eyes. Finally, Lucy stood in front of Luo Zhen and burst into tears, attracting the attention of everyone in the guild. "Luo Zhen, why did you make Lucy cry?" "Luo Zhen, you can't treat a girl like this. This is not a gentleman's behavior." Luo Zhen quickly apologized to Lucy. Seeing this scene, Erza and Mira Jane stood beside Luo Zhen angrily, accusing Luo Zhen a while. Luo Zhen's head was full of black lines. Seeing the interested expressions of everyone in the guild, Luo Zhen raised his hands helplessly. Okay, I apologize." Under Mira Jane's comfort, Lucy finally stopped crying. Mira Jane stood in front of Luo Zhen with her hips crossed, raised her head and looked into Luo Zhen's eyes and said, "Luo Zhen, you can't treat girls like this." I know. With a helpless face, Luo Zhen sat on a chair like a child and let Mira Jane teach him. Seeing Luo Zhen's attitude of admitting his mistake, Mira Jane nodded in satisfaction. stepped aside to comfort Lucy. Erza folded his arms and looked at Luo Zhen with a serious face. With a smile on Luo Zhen's face, he said to Erza, "I really didn't want to scare Lucy into tears." Snort. Erza Tsundere turned his head and gave Luo Zhen a supercilious look. Looking at the back of Erza going away, Luo Zhen sighed suddenly. There was only one Li Sana sitting beside him. Luo Zhen turned his head and took a look at Li Sana. "Brother Luo Zhen, I heard you." A playful smile appeared on Lisana's face, and she stuck out her tongue at drinking Luo Zhen. Lisana sees everything she sees. "You little girl." Luo Zhen rolled his eyes, stretched out his hands, and rubbed Lisana's head for a while. Lisana pouted and glared at Luo Zhen. But Lisana didn't duck. "I'm not a little girl anymore." With her hips crossed and her chest straightened out, Lisana shouted to Luo Zhen, "I've grown up." Yes, you have grown up." Luo Zhen stretched out his finger and tapped on Lisana's forehead, waved his hand in a perfunctory manner, and said. Seeing Luo Zhen's perfunctory attitude, Lisana suddenly became short of breath. "Okay." Pooting his mouth, his face is full of anger. "I'm ignoring you, brother Luo Zhen." Lisana slapped Luo Zhen's arm heavily, then jumped and trotted towards Mirajane's direction. Looking at the back of Lisana going away, Luo Zhen suddenly felt helpless. Why did I betray my relatives all at once? Sitting at the corner of the bar, Luo Zhen stretched. Some drowsiness flooded in, and Luo snapped his fingers. After a while, a white cloud suddenly rushed in at the door. "Master, here I come." Zeus, who rushed into the guild, let out a loud roar, which attracted the attention of everyone in the guild. Zeus rushed towards Luo Zhen's direction, and then excitedly asked Luo Zhen, "Master, is there any task for me?" "Sure enough, I'm the most trustworthy one." Chapter 89, I am the master's most trusted subordinate. "Master, is there any task for me?" Zeus rushed in front of Luo Zhen excitedly, with excitement in his eyes and excitement on that humanized face, floating back and forth by Luo Zhen's side constantly. He kept muttering to himself, "Sure enough, I'm the only subordinate that the master trusts the most. What Prometheus? What Napoleon? Go away." Zeus's eyes suddenly became proud, and he stayed in front of Luo Zhen, looking at Luo Zhen expectantly, waiting for Luo Zhen to issue a task to himself. Looking at the excited Zeus, Luo Zhen rolled his eyes, grabbing Zeus' soft body and pressing it to the ground. Luo Zhen stepped directly on Zeus's body, and then lay on Zeus's body with one hand supporting his head. "Go home." Luo Zhen yawned, patted Zeus's body, and seemed to be falling asleep with his eyes closed. Zeus's excited expression immediately froze on his face, and he floated up very aggrieved, slowly floating towards the outside of the guild. Although Zeus was aggrieved, he still tried his best to keep the balance and stability of 390's body so that Luo Zhen can sleep comfortably on his body. Luo Zhen, who returned home, patted Zeus on the head, smiled, and said to Zeus, "Good job." Then, without waiting for Zeus' reply, Luo Zhen turned around and went into the room and lay down on the bed. Seeing the back of Luo Zhen disappearing from sight, Zeus froze for a moment. With his head raised, he floated proudly in the living room. In the living room, Prometheus and Napoleon are playing, although I don't know what they're playing with a knife and a ball of flames. Zeus grinned and came to the two of them. Looking up at the two of them, he said with an extremely arrogant expression, "Did you hear that? Euron just praised me. I am the most trustworthy subordinate of the master. You two are not as good as me." The two Prometheus didn't want to talk to Zeus at all, and were playing there in their own way. Seeing that he was ignored, a black line appeared on Zeus' forehead. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Do you hear me?" "Fool, are you a dummy?" Prometheus and the others raised their heads impatiently and glanced at Zeus with complete disdain in their eyes. Especially Prometheus completely ignored Zeus. "What did you say? You fire idiot!" Zeus was furious and angrily roared at Prometheus. "Are you trying to wake up the master?" "Idiot!" Prometheus grinned, with contempt in his eyes, completely ignoring the angry fool. Hearing Prometheus' words, Zeus instantly wilted like a frost-beaten eggplant. Remember it. Zeus gritted his teeth and looked at Prometheus, sulked, and went back to his room. Idiot! Prometheus curled his lips, then turned his head and started playing with Napoleon. After returning to the room, Zeus became more and more angry as he thought about it, and he was still thinking about it. Suddenly, Zeus rushed straight out the window. It turned into a streak of light and disappeared into the air. Zeus, who left home, sensed a familiar atmosphere and went straight to a magnificent building not far from Magnolia. This is Magnolia's hospital. In a ward of the hospital, a blonde-haired man was lying on the bed, with lightning flashing in his eyes. Surrounding the hospital bed, two men and a woman gathered around, looking worriedly at Ragsa, on the bed. Chua! A ray of light rushed into the room in an instant, and the three people beside the hospital bed immediately became vigilant. Yo, lager thus. It was Zeus who came, and Zeus who came to the ward grinned at Legasis on the bed. What are you doing here? Lagersis frowned, looked at Zeus displeased, and asked, I am hungry. Zeus directly passed the three Thors and came to Lagerth's hospital bed with a big grin and said to Lager with a grin. Looking at the white cloud in front of him with a livid face, Lagersis gritted his teeth and looked at him. Eat it and get out. The veins on Lagersis' forehead bulged, and he looked at Zeus in front of him with anger. Immediately, Lagersis exhaled a turbid breath, and a flash of lightning emerged from his palm, and he threw Zeus directly. Zeus opened his mouth to swallow the thunder light directly into his stomach, and glanced at the three thunder gods who were angrily staring at him beside the hospital bed. After Zeus left, the three Thors spoke. Luo Zhen is too much. It's fine if you hurt Lagersis and let Zeus insult you, although this is what you promised Lagersis. But isn't it too much for him to do this? Damn it. All three of the thunder gods were aggrieved and fought for Lagersis. Enough. The three people's words kept pouring into their ears, making Lagersis' already ashen complexion even uglier. He shouted angrily, and the thunder in his eyes flickered continuously. Free, big slow, evergreen. I've decided I'm going to start a civil war on Fairy Tail. Pull the old man down from the president's throne. The position of Fairy Tail president is none other than me. Lagersis raised his head and looked at the three people beside the hospital bed with passionate eyes. Hearing Lagersis' words, the three of them were startled, staring blankly at Lagersis with fanatical eyes. Although the three members of the Thunder God congregation are Lagertha's personal guards, all of this is under the premise of being loyal to Fairy Tail. They are more loyal to Fairy Tail. The three looked at each other, and Freed really wanted to speak. Lagersis raised his arms suddenly to stop Freed, and then spoke to the three of them. Have you all forgotten? What did those bastards say about Fairy Tail when we got back? Since when did Fairy Tail become a guild where drunks in taverns judge each other? Chapter 90, then I will reshape Fairy Tail. Since Fairy Tail can only become such an existence in the hands of the old man, let me reshape Fairy Tail. Lagerthas's eyes flickered with fanaticism, and his eyes scanned back and forth on the three Thors. The three members of the Thunder God clan were silent, scanning back and forth on the other two. Have you all forgotten? When we came back in the tavern, what did the drunks say about Fairy Tail? Since when did Fairy Tail become a guild for the drunks in these taverns to judge Dash? The veins on Lagersis' head were bulging, and his eyes were full of madness. After Lagersis' voice fell, the three of them looked at each other in unison. Immediately, Freed raised his head, looked at Lagerthas solemnly, and said, We're done with you. Lager thus. Regarding the current status of Fairy Tail, the three-lied are also somewhat dissatisfied. Why are they willing to follow behind Lagersis? Because they are also keen on the strong. And Lagerthas is no different from being a strong man. They are willing to follow behind Lagerthas. Although the current Fairy Tail is much stronger, there are also many wizards in the guild that they don't even look down on. This made the three of the Thunder Gods a little dissatisfied. Since Lagersis wants to do it, let's do it to the fullest. Good, Freed, big slow, evergreen. Lagersis showed a smile on his face and glanced at the three Thors beside him with satisfaction. Lagersis, when shall we do it? Immediately. Freed looked at Lagersis calmly and asked, Lajerces pondered for a moment, then raised his head and said to the three of them, 1 week later, the harvest festival. Because of Lajertha's body, Lagerus postponed the time to Magnolia's big day a week later. Receiving festival. On this day, the residents of Magnolia and the wizards of Fairy Tale will join in this annual festival. This day is also a great opportunity for Lajerces to make a move. Although he didn't think about the specific matters clearly, there was firmness in Lajerces' eyes. It has been determined that this thing must be done. Good. Freed nodded, and the calm lad immediately thought about the plan for this matter in his mind. Soon, a week passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Fairy Tale was bustling inside and out, and everyone happily came in and out of the guild. In the guild, are all the beautiful girls wearing bright clothes? Oh, Mira Jane is so beautiful. Erza is so pretty. Levy is so cute. We will always support you. Kinda come on. Be sure to beat Erza and Mira Jane. Hey, come on, Lucy. On the stage, there were glamorous girls wearing beautiful clothes, and everyone in the guild was standing under the stage and waving at the girls. Erza changed her usual style and wore a white dress, which made Erza look gentle and pleasant. Looking at the position below the stage, Luo Zhen looked at himself with a smile on his face. A blush welled up on Erza's face, and he smiled back at Luo Zhen. Natsu and Happy seemed to be pulled apart to make up the numbers, and they were listlessly cheering for Lucy on stage. Seeing that the two looked listless, as if they hadn't slept for a few days, Lucy fell short of breath. You two, take it seriously. With her hands on her hips, Lucy yelled at Natsu Happy at the bottom of the stage. Oh, Lucy, don't be so serious. You can't beat Mira Jane and Erza anyway. Natsu buttoned his ears and said indifferently. Lucy's face froze, and the expression froze on her face. Gritting his teeth, he looked at Natsu and Happy. You two, you're not allowed to go to my house anymore. Lucy squeezed her fist and stared at the two of them fiercely. Happy and Natsu looked at each other and didn't listen to Lucy's threat at all and blew on the fingers that clasped their ears. Natsu yawned. Zero asked for flowers boringly said, Lucy, today is the delivery festival. Magnolia is super lively. We don't want to waste time with you here. Happy, and I will go first. Speaking without giving Lucy time to react, Natsu and Happy turned their heads and rushed out of the guild. You two damn guys. Seeing the disappearance of the two, Lucy gritted her teeth with hatred, but there was nothing she could do about them. Really, Ms. Erza and Ms. Mira Jane are so rich. Why do they still participate in this kind of competition? Don't they have money to pay the rent? Lucy looked at the beautiful Erza and Mira Jane on the stage without tears and squatted down decadently. Yo, Lucy, what's wrong with you? You look listless at this moment. A voice suddenly came from in front of him. Lucy raised her head in wonder, only to see that Luo Zhen appeared in front of her at some point. Lucy stood up quickly with a smile on her face, waved to Luo Zhen, and said with a smile, Mr. Luo Zhen, good morning. Luo Zhen had black lines all over his head, looked at Lucy with a forced smile, and said, What are you talking nonsense? It's already noon now, and you don't have to be so restrained. I'm only a little older than you, so I don't need to use honorifics. Although Lucy had a smile on her face, she was roaring constantly in her heart. What ghost? Last time you said you were going to kill me. But today's Lucy is cute. With a forced smile on Lucy's face, just as she was about to answer Luo Zhen's words, she heard Luo Zhen's voice reach her ears. Very cute. Cute. Luo Zhen's voice echoed in Lucy's ears, causing a blush to appear on Lucy's face. There's only one sentence echoing in my mind. Lucy is so cute today. Where, thank you, Mr. Luo Zhen, for your compliment. Lucy was talking nonsense for a while and kept waving her palms at Luo Zhen, but bursts of steam were constantly coming out of her head. Chapter 91 Miss Fairy Tale Selection. Evergreen. In the Guild of Fairy Tale, everyone is still immersed in the joy of the Harvest Festival. Beautiful girls on the stage appeared in turn. Below the stage, many mages and residents from other places also came here admiringly. Because Magnolia's magic parade is very famous, many people are willing to spend some time and money just to come to Magnolia to take a look at the time of Fairy Tale's magic parade. In the Fairy Tale Guild, Lucy worked hard to cheer herself up. We must win this game. This is 500,000 yuan, which is enough for me to pay 7 months' rent. Lucy's eyes were full of fighting spirit, but after seeing her opponent, Lucy suddenly became depressed. How can this be won? Fairy Queen 403, Erza, Signature Girl Mira Jane, Levi, Kana, Biska, and Juvia, who is new to the guild but also has a high popularity. Lucy crouched in the corner, facing the wall with a dull expression. Impossible to win, completely losing confidence in herself. Lucy muttered to herself with a dull expression. At this time, a young man with short hair walked to the center of the stage, held a microphone in his hand, and cheered to everyone present. Welcome everyone to Fairy Tale. The host of the Miss Fairy Tale contest. I will be the host of the Miss Fairy Tale contest. Sorcerer Max has taken over. Max held the microphone and introduced to the audience off the court. Immediately, Max pointed to a beam of light on the side and shouted loudly. Now let us welcome today's one contestant from Fairy Tale, an exotic beauty with a different dimensional stomach, Kana Alberona. As Max's voice fell, a figure appeared under the beam of light. I saw Kana holding a card and slowly appearing in the beam of light. The moment Kana appeared, everyone cheered instantly. Kana held a card and smiled sweetly at the audience. In an instant, there was a burst of loud cheers from the audience. Then I invite the next two contestant. Although she has just joined the guild, her strength has already reached S level. The woman who keeps dripping with rain, Juvia Locke. Amidst the cheers of the crowd, a wave of water emerged on the stage, and Juvia's figure slowly emerged from the wave. There was a smile on his cold face. Suddenly seeing Luo Zhen in the crowd, a blush suddenly appeared on his face. When Luo Zhen saw this scene, he was a little puzzled. He and Juvia probably didn't know each other, because Jubi seemed to be shy when he saw him. But before Luo Zhen could think too much, Juvia's figure had already disappeared from the stage. I invite the next third contestant, Fairy Tale's signature girl. Her beauty makes people all over the continent fall under her skirt. She is Mira Jane. With Max's voice shouting, the entire guild was suddenly filled with shouts. Finally waiting for you, Mira Jane, the winning candidate. It looks much better than in the book. It's me. The shouts in the guild kept Mira Jane speechless. With a gentle and pleasant smile on her face, Mira Jane waved to everyone. Immediately Mira Jane said with a smile, "Because I am good at transforming magic, let me show it to everyone." Saying that, a burst of white light flashed on Mira Jane's body. Suddenly, Mira Jane's head becomes Happy's head. Mira Jane with a cat head said to everyone, "Only the face is happy." Then another puff of smoke cleared, and Gajiel's head appeared on top of Mira Jane's. "Only the head is Gajiel." The entire guild fell into silence for an instant, and everyone stared blankly at Mira Jane, whose head was constantly changing on the stage, until a puff of smoke cleared and Mira Jane regained her face. Backstage, Lucy was full of excitement. "Great! The winning candidate has killed himself. I still have a chance." Mira Jane's sense of oppression was so strong that Lucy felt that she had no chance of winning at all. But now Lucy cheers up immediately 0. Then a few more girls came on stage. They are the Fairy Queen Erza Shukarat on the 4th, Levi Mark Harden of number 5, and Biska Muhan, the sexy sniper of Brother 6. When it was Lucy's turn to play, Lucy walked onto the stage anxiously, looking around the audience nervously. Suddenly, a voice sounded behind Lucy. "Contestant number 8, it's my introduction time." For 500,000, Lucy turned her head and looked behind her bravely. Evergreen was crossing his arms, looking at the crowd with a smile on his face. "The fairy is me. The beauty is me. That's right, I represent all of this. And of course I, Evergreen, won the championship." Evergreen is holding a small fan in his hand. Shun Guang glances at everyone in the field. Seeing Evergreen appear, the expressions of the Fairy Tale wizards present changed slightly. "Wait a minute. Why are you hindering me? This is about my livelihood." Lucy didn't know what happened, so she mustered up the courage to come to Evergreen. At this moment, The expression of the groom Carlo in the audience changed suddenly, and he shouted at Lucy, "Lucy, don't look into Evergreen's eyes." But 4.9 in the next moment, Evergreen has taken off his glasses. With a flash of golden light in his eyes, Lucy's body was directly petrified. The sudden change caused many spectators in the guild to run out of the guild screaming. The host Max on the stage quickly directed everyone to evacuate in an orderly manner. The mages of Fairy Tale stood up one after another, and they looked dignified when they sensed something was wrong. The stable Carlo's face sank, and he shouted at Evergreen, "Evergreen, what do you want?" Evergreen smiled lightly and pulled down the curtain behind him. A few girls in the background were all petrified, except Erza. Erza was knocked out and was lying on the ground in a coma. Chapter 92, the program of the festival begins. Evergreen, what do you want? After evacuating the crowd in the guild, the mages among the many guilds stood up and looked solemnly at Evergreen on the stage in front of them. In the festivals of previous years, the Thunder Gods never participated in the festivals. No matter what kind of activity it is, the Thunder Gods follow Lagerthus in their own way. The appearance of Evergreen this time made the companions in the guild tense up instantly. Then, as expected, Evergreen petrified all the girls in the Miss Fairy selection contest. Except for Erza, who was stunned and tied up, the rest of the girls were petrified. The horse Carlo's body suddenly swelled up, and the huge horse Carlo looked down on Evergreen on the stage. With fury in his eyes, he yelled at Evergreen, "Undo your magic quickly." "Evergreen, what do you want to do?" Makarlov's roar echoed in the guild, but Evergreen didn't hold back at all. At this moment, a furious thunder exploded in the guild. 07, a thunderbolt suddenly appeared in the guild and fell heavily on the stage. The thunder light dissipated, and the figure of Lagos's appeared on the stage. I saw Lajerces holding his arms at this time, with a smile on his face. Looking at the crowd in the audience, Lajerces grinned. "Old man, Fairy Tale guys, the festival is just about to begin. Festivals always have programs." There was arrogance in Lajerces' eyes, and he scanned the guild members. Suddenly, the eyes fell on Ai Masami not far away. I saw that Luo Zhen was crossing his arms at this moment, with no expression on his face, just looking at himself so calmly. After Lajerces glanced at Luo Zhen, he immediately looked away. Because of Luo Zhen, Evergreen didn't petrify Erza. Instead, he used the safety of his companions as a threat to stun Erza. Lagerthus, Makarlov's face sank, his eyes fixed on Lajerces' figure. At this time, everyone in the guild also discovered the other two figures that appeared on the second floor. Freed, Big Slow, Thunder Gods, Lajerth's personal guards are here. Everyone's face sank, watching this scene nervously. Looking at the tense crowd, Lajerces grinned and shouted at Carlos the horse, "Let's play, old man. Stop messing around with me again. Lagerthus, let Mira Jane restore them to how they were." The horse Karloff looked heavy and yelled at Lajerces, "How many people can survive before the magic parade begins?" Lajerthis smiled and said that above the stone statue of Lucy, a ray of thunder gradually condensed. The next moment, the thunder exploded and landed directly next to Lucy, and the stage was instantly blasted into a big hole. This scene hit everyone's hearts like a heavy hammer. "Lagerthus, UBD, Natsu yelled at Legasis with an angry face. "I think it's fine to use these women as hostages. If anyone dares to break the rules, I will smash them to pieces one by one." Lajerces showed a sinister grin and put his arms on Lucy's shoulders. "Lagerthus, this is not a joke. Who's kidding you? Old man." Lajerthis let out a roar, and the three Thunder Gods also came in front of Lagerthus. Glancing at the expressionless Luo Zhen not far away, then Freed stared at Makarlov and said, "Then let's see who is the strongest person with the tail of the girl. The rules are simple. The last person standing is the winner." Lajerces showed a smile at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes swept over everyone in the field and finally fell on Luo Zhen. "Of course, if you are willing to participate in this game, I am willing too." Although Lagos's has been defeated many times in the hands of Luo Zhen, Lagos's still refuses to accept. Having made sufficient preparations this time, Lajersis believes that he has the ability to fight Luo Zhen. Oh, then come a try. Luo Zhen raised his head. A smile appeared on his expressionless face. Isn't this great? I'm starting to burn. At this time, Natsu punched the table with a smile on his face, stood up, and looked at Lagoses with fighting spirit in his eyes. I don't dislike your easygoing personality. Lager thus folded his arms and looked at Natsu in the audience with contempt. Stop talking nonsense. Come and fight me. Natsu grinned, his fists ignited with flames, and rushed straight to Lagoses. Hey, you were defeated by Lajersis before. Have you forgotten? Max on the side hurriedly yelled at Natsu's back, trying to stop Natsu's behavior. That was when I was a kid. Natsu ignored it completely and rushed 467 towards Lagoses. Obviously, it happened at the end of last year. Seeing Natsu approaching in front of him, Lager thus glanced at him out of the corner of his eye and said lightly, "But I just don't like talking big words. You better calm down." As Lajersis' voice fell, a thunderbolt suddenly fell from the sky and fell straight on Natsu's body. In the crackling thunder, Natsu's figure fell from the sky. His whole body was emitting green smoke, his eyes were rolling, and he was lying on the ground twitching. If you want the girls to recover, then defeat us first. The three thunder gods stood beside Lajersis, their eyes proudly sweeping across the crowd. Evergreen covered half of his face with a fan and said with a laugh, "There are only 4 of us, and you have nearly 100. Big Slow chimed in, his magic item floating beside him. "The time is set at 3 hours. If it exceeds the time, these girls will turn into gravel." Evergreen's laughter echoed throughout the guild. The scope of the battle is the entire Magnolia. As long as we find it, we will start fighting. Lager thus folded his arms and stood on the stage announcing the rules of the battle. Chapter 93 Fairy Tale Battle. Here we go. The stable Carlo, who had been silent all this time, began to swell up. The stable Carlo, who had used the gigantic magic, let out a roar and punched Lagoses on the stage with one punch. The angry punch directly shattered the stage, splashing wooden blocks everywhere. Lager thus, how long are you going to mess around? Lajersis' figure turned into a bolt of thunder and disappeared, and when he reappeared, he was already on the second floor. Lajersis smiled grimly, looked at the horse Carlo, and shouted loudly, "Old man, I told you before, don't be in such a hurry. This is just a sideshow, enjoy it. Goblins." Lajersis laughed wildly, and a flash of thunder completely enveloped the figures of the thunder gods and the others. When the thunder light dissipated, the figures of Lajersis and others had disappeared from everyone's sight. Fairy Tale Battle. Beginning. Lajerth's voice still echoed in the guild, but the figures of several people had completely disappeared, leaving everyone staring at each other. The veins on Carlo's forehead were bulging, and his titanic body was trembling slightly. Obviously, he was very angry with Lajersis. I didn't expect Lajersis to do such a thing. Damn it, there must be a way to save my sister and the others. Alfman was already jumping in a hurry, about to rush out of the guild in a hurry. Grab Lagerus. Go and defeat the Thunder Gods. Biska, just wait. I will definitely save you. Alzak looked sullenly, looking at the petrified Biska on the stage. His eyes were gloomy. He turned his head and rushed out of the guild with everyone, looking for Thunder God and others. The BD, let me stop him. Carlos Ma was trembling slightly, turned his head with a sullen face, and rushed out of the guild. But at the moment when he came to the gate of the guild, Carlos the horse stopped as if he had hit a wall. Damn it, so it's Freed's warlock. Spell? What is that? There was one person left in the guild who came to Carlo the horse and looked at the empty wall in front of him. A spell is a kind of enchantment, and it will issue rules to people inside the enchantment. If you don't follow the rules, you will not be able to leave the enchantment. Ma Karloff was sullen. He didn't expect Lajersis to be so well prepared. Writing spells takes a lot of time, so it's not suitable for quick battles. As for this magical enchantment, Freed has no idea when it was written down. Is there no way to destroy it? Chairman, hearing Ma Karlov's explanation, Litas was very surprised and asked quickly, The rules of the spell are absolute. Makarlov was sullen, and he was no longer able to participate in this battle. Makarlov quickly turned his head and looked into the guild, only to see that Erza on the stage had also disappeared. Lajersis took Erza away with him. Makarlov glanced around the guild and quickly asked Litas, "Hey, have you seen Luo Zhen?" Did not see Luo Zhen's figure. Makarloshan's eyes were slightly worried. No, after Lajersis disappeared, Luo Zhen also disappeared. Litas shook his head, indicating that he hadn't seen Luo Zhen just now. Damn it, Luo Zhen won't be involved in Lajersis' plan. Ma Carlos was a little worried, because Luo Zhen, who had been silent, just now made Ma Carlos's heart beat. If Luo Zhen also participated in Lajersis' plan, then it would be impossible to win this battle. At this time, a line of words gradually emerged above the air at the door of the guild. All people over the age of 80 and stone statues are prohibited from entering and leaving. Lager thus, you are really difficult to deal with. Looking at the words floating above his head, Carlos Ma's face was cloudy and uncertain. Maybe Natsu can. Ma Karlov set his eyes on Natsu, who was still smoking and temporarily in a coma. If only Erza was here. Scanning around the stone statue on the stage, Carlos the horse was extremely helpless. Litas, why are you still here? Go out and find the thunder gods. Looking at Litas beside him, Carlos the horse yelled at him. Litas was silent, and then he lowered his head and whispered to the horseman Carlos, "I'm afraid of Lagoses." Seeing the fearful eyes of Litas, Gong fell down. Then quickly help me go to Dongfang Sunlin and find Poliusica. She may have medicine to cure petrification. Litas nodded and then left the guild. Watching Litas leave, Ma Karlov came to Happy's Natsu. Pushing Natsu's body, Natsu opened his eyes blankly. At a glance, he saw Carlo the horse beside him. "Old man, where's that guy from Lagoses?" Natsu opened his eyes and jumped up, and the light scanned the guild. But he couldn't find a figure of Lagoses and asked the horseman Carlos full of anger, "Just bet on your potential." Looking at the active Natsu, Ma Karlov thought to himself, and then said to Natsu, "Natsu, the festival has begun. Lager thus is somewhere in Magnolia. Go beat him up, please." Pointing to the empty door, Ma Karlov shouted loudly. "No problem." Natsu was full of fighting spirit, rushed to the door, and rushed out to hook. At this moment, Natsu's body suddenly hit the air. "What? How can it be?" Natsu bumped his head against Freed's technique, looking at the empty wall in front of him wonderingly. Ma Karlov looked surprised and said to Nake in shock, "Could it be that you are over 80 years old? It's all my fault. I failed to teach this child well." Seeing Natsu's constant smashing of the wall, Carlos the horse looked disappointed. His eyes were full of loneliness. He raised his head with a bitter smile on his face. Ma Karlov never imagined that when he was a child, he obviously liked Lagoses in Fairy Tale so much. Would do something like this now. Chapter 94 Fairy Tale is not that weak. Damn it. Lager thus. Let me out. Natsu kept tapping on the invisible wall in front of him. Happy kept going in and out of the air wall, holding Natsu's hand and walking outside. But in any case, there is no way to break through the limitation of this wall. Natsu slumped helplessly on the ground, looking extremely puzzled. Punching heavily on the ground in front of him, Natsu raised his head and shouted towards the sky, "Damn, it's Lagasis. Are you afraid that you won't be able to beat me? So you dare not let me out?" Accompanied by Natsu's roar, only silence answered him. Lager thus had left Fairy Tale by this time. At this time, Lajersis was standing on the steps of Magnolia Cathedral with his arms folded. He looked at Luo Zhen in front of him solemnly. Luo Zhen stepped forward and checked Erza, who passed out. "No big deal, just fainted from Evergreen's magic. You can wake up after a short rest. Are you here to beat me?" Lajersis folded his arms and looked at Luo Zhen with solemn and vigilant eyes. Although he knew that Luo Zhen's strength was very strong, Lajersis didn't have the slightest fear. With a fighting spirit in his eyes, he said to Luo 477 in a deep voice. Luo Zhen spread his hands and hugged Princess Erza. "I don't seem to need me in this battle. The strength of fairy tale is not as strong as you imagined. Saying that, Luo Zhen hugged Erza, turned his head, and left here. Looking at the back of Luo Zhen leaving, Legerses gritted his teeth. Damn it! How dare you underestimate me? Because of Luo Zhen's words, Legerses became sure breath, thinking that Luo Zhen is looking down on him. The current fairy tale is except for Luo Zhen, the old man Carlos, and Gildarts. Legerses doesn't think anyone else can beat him. Now that Luo Zhen has voluntarily withdrew from the battle, Ma Erza was also brought back by Luo Zhen. The old man was also imprisoned by the spell he used freed. Who else could be his opponent? Looking at the back of Luo Zhen leaving, the corners of Legerses' mouth curled up slightly, revealing a sinister smile. Since you have voluntarily given up, then I will accept the chairman position of Fairy Tale. Luo Zhen's back gradually, disappeared from Legertha's sight, and Lager thus also heaved a sigh of relief. Although he was not afraid of Luo Zhen, Legerses was not worried about Luo Zhen intervening in this battle. Although I have made perfect preparations, Luo Zhen is the variable. In cheerful Magnolia, the residents of the town are all happy for today's day. Today is the annual Harvest Festival, and it is also a festival of joy for everyone. On this day, Fairy Tale, the resident Wizards Guild in Magnolia, will also hold a magical parade. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared on the street. The residents were about to say hello to these mages, when suddenly a spell was opened on the ground. Enclose all these mages in the spell. On this invisible wall, lines of words gradually appeared. Only the strongest in the enchantment can leave. Damn it, is this going to make us kill each other? Damn it, when did Freed cast the spell? What trouble? What shall we do now? Scenes like this are happening all over Magnolia. Being blocked in the enchantment of the spell, everyone's complexion was ugly for a while. If they were killing each other, wouldn't they fall into Legerses' conspiracy? But if you don't do it, then you won't be able to leave this enchantment. At this time, in a street, the three of them were locked in a spell. The faces of the three of them were heavy, and they looked at the words that emerged ugly. What to do, Droy? Don't get excited. Let's wait for others here. Two of the Shadow Gear squad looked ugly, looked at each other, and said. At this time, there was only one person left with a heavy expression. His eyes swept over Droy and Sarusuke. Suddenly, a magic circle appeared in his hand. The other two reacted immediately and quickly distanced themselves from him. What does Alzak want? Alzak, you don't really believe in this terminology. Then we fall into that BD Freed's trap. Droy and Salusu's expressions changed, and they looked at Alzak vigilantly and shouted, I'm sorry, I have to save Biska. A little struggle flashed in Alzak's eyes, watching his former companion bite and drive the two of them. Hey, Alzak, don't be fooled. We are comrades on the same front. That's right, Alzak, don't be fooled by Legertha's plot. They just want to use this trick to reduce our numbers. The two looked at Alzak warily, trying to dissuade Alzak. Alzak struggled with his eyes, then became firm. Gun magic flash shooting. The magic circle condensed in his hands, and then he pulled out the pistol at his waist and attacked Droy and Sarusu in a black and white manner. Damn it, since you have made a move, we will show no mercy. The two looked ugly and looked at each other. The bullets hit, and the two dodged one after another. Falcon Tianxiang. With a flash of Sarusuke's footsteps, his figure turned into an afterimage and rushed straight to Alzak. From the very beginning, Sarusuke used his strongest moves, and his fast speed turned his figure into an afterimage. Jumping high, he kicked straight at Alzak. At the same time, Droy didn't sit still and scattered the seeds on the ground. Plant fist. The plants under their feet blinked and grew up, turning into fists and attacking Alzak. Alzak, a cowboy from the western continent, didn't panic at all, and his figure quickly dodged to dodge the attacks of the two. Gun magic tornado shot. With a sharp step on the ground, the whole person suddenly rose into the air. Two lasers shot out from his guns, heading for the Droy. Chapter 95. The Fairy Showdown. Unrecognized war with the lasing of two laser bullets. Alzak's figure fell from the sky to the ground. The half-kneeling Alzak put away his guns and walked out of the barrier without looking back. Sorry, imustrist biska. With regret in his eyes, Alzak turned his head and glanced at Droy and Sarusuk, who were lying on the ground. Immediately, the figure of Alzak resolutely walked towards the outside of the barrier. After Alzak defeated the two, the spell that trapped the three was released, and the result began to slowly dissipate. At the same time, the battle here also began to emerge on the magic wall at the entrance of the Fairy Tale Guild. Live broadcast to Makalov in the form of text. Makarov's complexion was heavy, and his gloomy eyes fixed on the civil servants on the wall. Alzak versus Droy, Salusuk. Alzak wins. Lagerthus. How dare you? The veins on Makarov's forehead bulged, and his face was full of anger. He punched the empty wall in front of him fiercely, and suddenly a series of magic words appeared on the air wall, blocking Makarov's fist. It is absolutely forbidden by Makarov to attack his guildmates. But Lagerthus used this method to make the guildmates kill each other, which made Makarov even more angry. Heavy fists kept hitting the wall, but all of them were blocked by Freed's technique. Seeing Makarov hitting the wall angrily, Happy flew to Makarov with worry in his eyes. President, don't worry. Little Happy, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Makarov forced an ugly smile on his face, comforting Happy. But anyone with a discerning eye can see Makarov's unusual anger on Makarov's face. Happy puffed up her chest, waved her wings, and floated in front of Makarov and said, President, don't worry. Fairy Tale is the best guild ever. Fairy Tale's companions are the best companions. They will definitely defeat Lagerthus and save everyone. Looking at Happy with his hands on his back, Makarov froze for a moment. Then a smile appeared on his face, and he reached out and rubbed Happy's head. Yes, Fairy Tale is the best wizard guild. I will trust my children and our companions. Makarov's eyes became firm, looking at the square outside the door where people were coming and going. Although Makarov fell silent, Natsu in the guild was still shouting and roaring Lajertha's name. Hello, Natsu. Calm down. With a dark face, Makarov watched Natsu running wildly in the guild, and the tables and chairs in the guild had been overturned by Natsu. With a livid face, Makarov punched Natsu on the head, knocking him to the ground. You brat, stop playing and continue destroying the guild. Makarov yelled at Natsu, who was lying on the ground with the veins on his forehead. Old man, unravel this spell. I'm going out to challenge Legasis. Natsu jumped up from the ground as if he was not injured and kept hitting the invisible wall in front of him. As Natsu continued to collide, Wenji began to shine continuously above the sleeping style. But there is no sign of being damaged at all. Natsu, calm down. Since the formula has been written, you must abide by the rules of the formula. There is no way to untie the formula from the inside. Makarov glanced at Natsu, then sat cross-legged by the door with his arms folded. Trust our companions. Makarov closed his eyes and muttered to himself. In the city of Magnolia, wizards with Fairy Tale are constantly falling into Freed's spell. In desperation, everyone had no choice but to start a fight, but faced with their former companions. Everyone can't do anything to their companions. Cut, these people are real. Just beat them down with your hands. Freed stood on the roof, and Bixlow beside him frowned, watching the mages in the street in front of them constantly attacking each other. But they didn't kill them at all. Zero, seeking flowers. Bixlow, are you fighting Evergreen? Can you kill the companions of Fairy Tale? Freed glanced at him and then asked the cruel question. Asked by Freed, Bixlow fell silent immediately. We recognize the strength of Lajertha's, but facing the companions of the guild, I still have no way to kill them completely. Freed closed his eyes with a slightly struggling look on his face. Bixlow and Evergreen beside him also fell silent. They agree with what Freed just said. The reason why they joined Fairy Tale is that they are attracted by Fairy Tale and deeply love this guild. Later, he was impressed by the strength of Lagerthus and voluntarily became Lajerthas's personal guard. They resisted the launch of this goblin civil war from the bottom of their hearts. Freed, Now that things have happened, we can only follow Lagerus all the way. Big Slow was silent for a moment, then reached out and patted Freed on the shoulder. Freed opened his eyes and nodded, not continuing to speak. Okay, let's all disperse. The goblins are about to decide the winner. Let's wait for our respective opponents. Freed's eyes swept across the street, and the spells he had set up were unraveled a lot. Presumably, quite a few wizards stood out. Vic Slow and Evergreen nodded, and the figure disappeared on the roof with a swish. Luo Zhen was at home at this time, and his knowledge and domineering aura completely enveloped the entire Magnolia. The loud battle in Magnolia was all reflected in Luo Zhen's mind. At this moment, Erza, who had fainted, slowly woke up. After opening his eyes, Erza sat up abruptly. A long sword appeared in his hand and looked around vigilantly. Chapter 96, I also want to change the status quo of Fairy Tale. Evergreen, Erza, who was lying on the sofa, opened his eyes suddenly and immediately jumped up on the sofa, making an angry sound. With a flash of white light, a long sword appeared in Erza's hand, and his eyes scanned around vigilantly. There is no sign of Evergreen and several other girls around. The figure of Luo Zhen was sitting lazily on the recliner beside him, with his eyes closed as if he was resting. Erza put away the long sword in his hand, turned his head, and was about to rush out of the house. Erza, where are you going? Luo Zhen didn't open his eyes and asked the moment Erza stepped out of the door. Erza's footsteps stopped, and Erza, who stopped, turned his head and glanced at Luo Zhen with a complicated expression. Lagerthus 403 and the Thunder Gods are back, and they want to start a civil war in Fairy Tale. Erza looked at Luo Zhen with a complicated expression, and looked at Luo Zhen with a calm expression and said. Luo Zhen slowly opened his eyes, without any emotion in them, looking at Erza calmly. The two just looked at each other quietly. The next moment, Luo Zhen said, I know, why didn't you stop Lagerthus? Erza frowned and asked Luo Zhen, because I want Fairy Tale as it is. Luo Zhen looked calmly at Erza and said. Erza's complexion changed slightly. He looked at Luo Zhen solemnly and said, Are you also involved in the operation of Lagoses? If there is only one Lagerthus, it is still possible to defeat Lagerthus with Fairy Tale's companions alone. Although the Thunder Gods are very strong, Fairy Tale also has a lot of powerful mages, not worse than Lagerthus and Thor's. Besides, her Erza is also an S-class mage, and she thinks that she is not much worse than Lagerthus. But if Luo Zhen also participated in Lagerthus' plan, then Erza felt that there was no chance of winning at all. Even Makarov may not be able to get benefits from Luo Zhen's hands. Not to mention the ordinary wizards of Fairy Tale. Although he is also an S-class mage like Luo Zhen, Erza is still ashamed of himself and knows the gap between himself and Luo Zhen. Under Erza's solemn gaze, Luo Zhen looked at Erza with an interested smile on his face and said, If I say yes, what will you do? Erza gritted his teeth, staring at Luo Xia. After a long silence, Erza's expression was very complicated. After a while, Erza suddenly raised his head, looked at Luo Zhen firmly, and said, If that's the case, I will try my best to defeat you. Hand you over to the guildmaster. If you are expelled from the guild, I will accompany you to quit the guild. We promise to be together forever, but I won't allow you to hurt our beloved Fairy Tale. Erza's eyes were extremely firm, and he stood in front of Luo Zhen in armor. Looking at Erza's determined gaze, a smile appeared on Luo Zhen's face. Standing up on the recliner, the tall body stood in front of Erza. Stretching out his hand and rubbing Erza's long crimson hair, Luo Zhen said with a smile, Don't worry. Although I want to change Fairy Tale's current appearance, it is definitely not in such an extreme way. Real. Hearing Luo Zhen's words, Erza breathed a sigh of relief, but still asked Luo Zhen nervously. Luo Zhen rolled his eyes, stretched out his finger, and flicked Erza's tender forehead. When did I lie to you? Erza breathed a sigh of relief and glared at Luo Zhen. With a flash of white light, the long sword emerged in Erza's hand. Then I'm leaving. I'm going to defeat Lagerthus. Erza walked out of the room resolutely with a long sword in his hand. Luo Zhen looked at Erza's back helplessly, trying to stop Erza, but didn't speak. With a snap of his fingers, Bai Defumizi appeared beside Luo Zhen at the same time. You follow Erza, don't interfere with Erza's fight, but keep Erza safe. The homies nodded, their figures floating in the air. Dash outside the window, following Erza's figure. Although Erza spotted the homies as soon as they appeared, Erza did not let them leave. Knowing that it was Luo Zhen who asked them to protect him, Erza did not refuse Luo Zhen's kindness. After Erza left home, he quickly searched for Lagerthus in Margot lore. Soon I met Fairy Tale's companions on the street. After seeing Erza's figure, everyone immediately became overjoyed. If Erza can participate in this battle, then he will definitely win this time. Have you found Lagerthus and Thor? After seeing the companions of Fairy Tale, Erza hurriedly asked everyone. Everyone shook their heads and searched for Magnolia for a long time, but they didn't see any figures of Lagoses and Thor. Erza's face was heavy, and he said to the crowd, "Then let's act separately, and we must find out Lagoses and the Thors before the magic parade begins." Everyone echoed in unison, and Erza's joining made everyone feel awe-inspiring. Everyone was a little scared when facing Lagoses, an S-class mage. But now that Erza, who is also a level 5 mage, has joined, let them feel that the combat power of the two sides is balanced after hitting 3.2. Suddenly, just as Erza was about to leave, a spell traps Erza and many wizards inside. Even the three homies in the sky cannot escape the enchantment of the spell. This is Freed's spell. Facing the spell, Erza's expression sank. As the wizard of Fairy Tale, Erza is quite familiar with Freed's spells. Suddenly, a word appeared on the barrier in front of him. Only the strongest mage within the barrier can leave. Erza's face sank, and he roared towards the empty surroundings. "Freed, UBD, do you want us to kill each other?" Chapter 97, Let me see the gap with you. "Freed, UBD, do you want us to kill each other?" Erza held a long sword, looked around with fury in his eyes, and was constantly searching for Freed. But Freed, who wrote the magic formula, left here long ago, and the complexions of the 10 wizards and Erza, who were locked in the barrier, suddenly turned ugly. Damn it, what should we do now? Do we really have to kill each other before we can leave? BD, wouldn't you fall into Lagertha's conspiracy? Doesn't he just want to weaken our numbers so that we can better increase their advantages? I can't believe how strong this technique is. Speaking of which, one of the mages raised his arm, and a fireball condensed in his heart. Accompanied by the loud explosion, the fireball directly penetrated the wall formed by the condensed spell. Explodes directly on the street. Damn it, not at all. What should we do now? Erza 08. I can only rely on you. At this moment, one of them glanced at the crowd swept over, and then looked at Erza with a serious expression. Everyone was slightly taken aback, and then fell silent. If you want to fight against Lagertha's, you can only rely on Erza. Everyone looked at each other. The next moment, a bad premonition suddenly rose in Erza's heart. I saw the mages shot one after another, but they didn't aim at the companions around them. The magic created wounds on his body, and in less than a moment, all the mages standing in front of Erza fell to the ground. You! Looking at the injured companions who fell to the ground, Erza looked at everyone in a daze. At this time, a magician forced himself to support himself, raised his head and grinned at Erza, and said, "Erza, it's up to you." As he also fainted, the enchantment formed by this technique was completely shattered in the next moment. Erza, who was suppressing his anger, had cold eyes and turned his head to look at everyone who fell on the ground. "Don't worry you. I will take your will, and that fellow Taragas will give you a good beating." As he said that, Erza quickly ran up the street, roaring angrily. "Lagerthus, UBD, come out to me." Erza's voice echoed through the streets of Magnolia, with the town's residents on both sides of the road. Seeing Erza running wildly on the street with a long sword in his hand, everyone hurriedly avoided to both sides of the street. What happened to Fairy Tale? The one just now is Erza. Why is she looking for Lagertha's? Who knows? Fairy Tale can come up with something new every day. That's right, if you don't make a lot of noise then it's not fairy tale. The residents of the town seemed to be familiar with the noise of fairy tale, and Erza's strangeness didn't make them aware of it. Hey, Zeus, should we report this to the master? The task assigned to us by the master is to protect Erza. It's not that you don't know the master's ability. The master must know what happened here. Prometheus was a little worried, looking at the furious Erza on the street. He couldn't help asking the two homies beside him. Zeus and Napoleon glanced at him and then spoke. After listening to the two of them, Prometheus also fell silent. Indeed, their mission is to protect Erza. The spell has no effect on the three homies at all. They can enter and exit the spell freely. Perhaps because the three of them are not yet complete living bodies, the spell did not affect them. The figure galloped, and Erza kept leaping on the roof. Soon, a familiar figure appeared in front of him. Gray! Erza, why are you here? Seeing Gray's figure, Erza was overjoyed, but did not close the distance with Gray. Gray also knew about the problem with the technique, so he didn't stay close to Erza. Two people stood there far away, shouting from the air. Have you found Lagerthus and Thor? Pulling away from Gray, Erza hastily asked Gray. Big Slow is ahead. I'm chasing him. Gray nodded, pointed in a direction not far away, and shouted loudly. Understood. Take down Big Slow first. Erza nodded heavily, and after searching all the way, he finally found the figures of the Thunder Gods. With Erza's footsteps, his figure drew a graceful arc in the air and rushed straight to the direction Gray was pointing at. Not long after, Big Slow appeared in Erza's sight. Big Slow, stop me. Because of the magical barrier, Erza was full of anger at this time and roared at Big Slow's back. Hearing the familiar voice behind him, Guthrow's complexion changed slightly. Hey, are you kidding me? Joke, 790, as Big Slow spoke. The magic item floating around him repeated his words. Erza, Big Slow, where's that guy from Lagerthus? He stopped, knowing that he was not Erza's opponent in terms of speed. Guthrow looked at Erza solemnly. Erza roared at Big Slow's figure with an angry face. If you want to know where Lagerthus is, then go find it yourself. Big Slow grinned, tongue sticking out of his mouth. It revealed the black guild crest engraved on his tongue. Then wait for me to take you down first. There was a flash of white light on Erza's body. He was dressed in Tianlun armor and stood opposite Shunga's Siluo with two swords in his hands. Bring it on. His expression was serious, but Big Slow wasn't afraid at all. Let me see where the gap between me and you is. Big Slow's eyes lit up with a fighting spirit. As a member of the Thors of the Lagosa's Guard, Big Slow is very powerful. Sword of Tianlun, Erza holds two swords and looks straight at Guthrow's figure. Under the exposure of the sun, the long sword flickered with cold light. Chapter 98. The Old Bottom has been figured out. Sword of Tianlun, Erza was dressed in Tianlun armor, stomped on the roof, and rushed straight to Big Slow. Come on, let me see how strong you can be as a level 5 mage alongside Lagerthus. Big Slow also had excited eyes, looking at Erza with awe-inspiring look. The 5 figures next to him float beside Big Slow. Come on. The puppet kept repeating Big Slow's words, and the mechanical voice echoed in Erza's ears. The long sword slashed at Big Slow's side, but Big Slow barely avoided it. Line formation. Big Slow waved his right hand, and the 5 puppets floating beside him suddenly came out of the pupa, arranged in a straight line, and floated in front of him. The next moment, the puppet's mouth spit out rays one after another, directly bombarding Erza. Erza walked lightly, easily dodging the ray attack. It's not over yet. Big Slow roared, and then manipulated the 5 puppets to rearrange. Formation X. The dolls quickly rearranged and turned into an X formation. Lasers shot out from their mouths, constantly bombard Erza. Change Vudra armor. Knowing that it was impossible to avoid melee attacks until Big Slow, Erza directly put on his most powerful armor. Against the lasing rays, the laser keeps moving forward. The ray laser bombarded Erza's huge shield continuously, but there was no way to break through Erza's defense at all. Seeing Erza approaching step by step, Jingusro did not lie at all. Just as Erza approached a certain distance, Big Slow directly manipulated his puppet to rearrange. Victory formation. Big Slow stuck out his tongue, his eyes flashed wildly. The next moment, the 5 puppets turned into an afterimage and rushed straight to Erza. Because of the short distance, the doll quickly reached Erza's side. 5 dolls float around Erza, enveloping Erza. Erza's expression froze. Looking at the 5 puppets surrounding him, he didn't sit still at all. Change and amplify armor. A burst of white light flashed on Erza's body, and then a brand new armor appeared. The 5 puppets surrounding Erza also began to accumulate laser rays in their mouths, and they wanted to use this trick to completely eliminate Erza. Hey, Erza is in danger. Don't we need help? Why are you panicking? Erza is not limited to this level. In the sky, Zeus looked at Erza, surrounded by puppets, and shouted to Prometheus and Napoleon in a panic. Napoleon glanced at Zeus, not worried about Erza at all. After being scolded by Napoleon for a while, Zeus also calmed down, but he still looked at Erza below with some worry. I saw Erza wearing crystal clear armor, without any weapons and armors in his hands. I will accept your head. There was excitement in Big Slow's eyes, and the loud sound of the wind accompanied his excitement. All the dolls sprayed out a dazzling laser beam from their mouths. The 5 dolls shot out rays at the same time, and shot towards Erza, who was surrounded by them. The dazzling ray completely enveloped Erza in the blink of an eye, and Erza's figure in the ray could no longer be seen. When the ray stopped, Big Slow roared excitedly. Very good. The 5 puppets returned to Big Slow's side and kept repeating Guthlow's words. Great, great, great. At this moment, a figure suddenly rushed out of the smoke and dust. Big Slow didn't even see the action of this figure clearly. She had already appeared in front of him in the blink of an eye. A heavy punch hit Big Slow in the chest. Big Slow only felt a tight pain in his chest, and the next moment he flew upside down from the roof. He slammed into the wall next to the street. Big Slow wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked at Erza standing on the roof with shock in his eyes. How is it possible? Why are you fine? Big Slow looked at Erza in shock, but his body was a little charred, and he couldn't see any injuries at all. This armor is a piece of armor treasured by the Senate, which can greatly enhance the user's abilities in all aspects. I just added strength, speed, etc. to the defense, and barely blocked your attack. Lusa stood on the roof with her right hand akimbo, looking down at Big Slow. The sun shone on Erza's back, and the glaring sunlight made it impossible for Guthrow to see Erza's face at all. Big Slow grinned suddenly and jerked off the mask on his head. Grave accent, forget it. It's all over. There was a blue gleam in Big Slow's eyes. The next moment, Erza's eyes were suddenly in a trance. Take it. Just when Erza was in a trance, the 5 dolls suddenly floated up. The mouth is always condensed with laser rays. Shoot straight at Erza. Maybe Erza didn't expect Big Slow to kill him at all, so he was bombarded directly by the laser at this moment. The laser beam exploded fiercely, and Erza's figure flew out backwards. Zhao Hao hit Feng heavily on the roof. Seeing that Erza was injured, the 3 homies in the air couldn't sit still anymore, and they were about to come down from the air immediately. Zeus, you are not allowed to interfere with me. Just as the 3 homies were about to land, Erza stood up with his hands on the ground, got up with a gloomy expression, and knelt on the roof with one knee. He lowered his head and shouted at the 3 homies in the air. Zeus and the others looked at each other and stopped their movements. Erza wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, stood up and walked towards Big Slow step by step. And in order to prevent Big Slow's modeling eyes, Erza deliberately used the magic of dressing up to make a face. Seeing Erza deliberately covering his eyes with a mask, Big Slow couldn't help but twitch his mouth. My old background is really clear. Chapter 99, I don't believe you really dare. See Erza put on a mask to cover his eyes. Big Slow's mouth twitched slightly. My old background has really been figured out. The modeling eye is Big Slow's whole card, and now the modeling eye has no effect on Erza. And the magic that he was good, it couldn't hurt Erza at all. Big Slow smiled wryly. But before Big Slow could think about life, Erza had already swooped towards Big Slow. The footsteps slammed on the roof, as fast as falling. Erza quickly came to Big Slow, clenched his fists, and his strength was instantly increased several times. Wrapped in shining armor, his fist was clenched, and he punched Big Slow's chest with a loud noise. Guthro was hit in the chest by Erza's punch. Smoke and dust rose everywhere, and both of them were shrouded in smoke and dust. In the smoke and dust, several laser rays continuously blazed, piercing through several large holes in the smoke and dust. Erza dodged the puppet's attack and also took the opportunity to distance Guthro and Erza. Clutching his painful chest, Big Slow looked at Erza's figure, turned his head, and ran away without any hesitation. Not an opponent at all. Seeing that Big Slow was about to run away, Erza ran after him. Under the enhancement of the augmentation armor, Erza's speed is extremely fast. Soon stopped in front of Big Slow. After stopping Big Slow, Erza put on a fighting posture, looked at him solemnly, and asked, "Where is that Evergreen guy?" Because Mira Jane and others have been petrified, Erza wants to find Evergreen first at this moment and ask her to release the petrification magic. Big Slow, who was stopped, did not continue to escape and suddenly grinned. Pointing to Erza's back, he said, "Here, there it is." As he said that, Erza suddenly noticed that there were laser beams shooting towards him from behind. Fairy machine gun goblin. Erza hurriedly dodged to dodge and rolled out on the ground in a state of embarrassment. Just as Erza was approaching, a series of light bombs had already bombarded the place where Erza was standing. Erza turned his head and saw that Evergreen appeared behind Erza at some point. Evergreen held a small fan and looked at Erza with a smile on his face. "What's the matter, our fairy queen? What can I do for you?" Evergreen lifted his glasses and looked at Erza, who was in a panic. "Evergreen, remove your petrification magic." Erza stood up, pointing at Evergreen and shouting, "But why?" Evergreen looked at Erza with a playful look on his face. "Erza, don't even think about fighting me. My petrified eyes can completely smash those guys in the guild here, and then those guys will never be able to save them again." Evergreen held his glasses, looked at Erza with a smile, and said. Hearing Evergreen's words, Erza's complexion sank slightly. In addition, when Big Slow came to Evergreen's side at this time, Erza's face became even more serious. "Evergreen, I don't believe you're going to spoil your guild mates." Erza took a deep breath and slowly stepped out of the cover of the wall. Seeing Erza coming out, Evergreen was about to attack Erza. The arm that was suddenly pulled by Big Slow at the side. Evergreen turned to stare at Big Slow, really wanting to say something. Suddenly saw Aya, Big Slow, pointing his finger at the sky. He raised his head and looked towards the sky, only to see three figures floating above Erza's head. The three figures were grinning ferociously, as if they were about to attack the two of them in the next moment. Evergreen's face paused, and then he lowered his raised arm. These three figures are exactly Zeus and the three of them. Zeus was already thundering all over his body at this time, and looked at the two of Evergreen with a grin on his face. "Do it. As long as you dare to hurt the partners of the guild, I will definitely hack you to death." Zeus grinned on his ferocious face and stared at Evergreen with lightning flashing all over his body, and said with a grin. Evergreen and Big Slow glanced at each other. Their expressions were a bit ugly. These three guys, the two of them can't deal with it at all. Not to mention there is an Erza. Evergreen can threaten Erza with the safety of his guildmates. But there was no way to threaten Zeus and the three of them. Evergreen's complexion was uncertain, and he stared angrily at the three Zeus in the air. "I don't believe you really dare." Evergreen was still struggling. Saley said restrainedly, "If you dare, let the thunder gods bury them with them." Zeus grinned grinningly, and Prometheus beside him was also full of flames. Compared with the grinning Prometheus and Zeus, Napoleon on the side is much quieter. There's a cold light in the eyes, and the eyes are as sharp as the light of a knife. "Let's go." Evergreen's face was livid, and he exchanged a glance with Big Slow, and his figure flew straight into the air. A pair of wings grew behind her, and she was about to leave here waving them. Big Slow stared blankly at the back of Evergreen leaving, and shouted with a livid face, "UBD, are you going to abandon me? Big Slow, do it yourself." Saying that, Evergreen's figure started to speed up. Zeus, Prometheus, Napoleon. I'll leave Evergreen to you three. Erza put on a fighting posture and watched Shungu Siluo yell at Demetsi. The three of Zeus looked at each other, their faces a little embarrassed. But Erza continued, "You don't care about my safety. Stop Evergreen for me." Erza's deep voice echoed in the ears of the three of them. After a while of psychological struggle, the three of them decided to chase Evergreen. Seeing the disappearance of the three homies, Erza then said to Big Slow, "Come on, let's continue our battle. Chapter 100, we will not give up any family members. Come on, let's continue our fight." The three homies chased after Evergreen, leaving only Erza and Big Slow behind. Erza was wearing a shining armor, looked at Big Slow sharply, and said. Big Slow smiled bitterly and waved his hand at Erza. He sat down not far from Erza, and the 5 dolls lurking beside him also stopped attacking and returned to Big Slow's side one after another. Seeing Big Slow's strange behavior, Erza did not act rashly and stared at him sharply. "I'm not your opponent. I don't have the strength to fight you anymore." Big Slow smiled bitterly, clutching his chest with an ugly expression on his face. Just now, Erza's punch had severely injured his internal organs, and now that it has been dragging on for so long, Big Slow has no strength to continue fighting. Seeing that Big Slow's face became a little pale, he sat on the ground extremely limp. Erza's expression moved, struggling to look at Big Slow, who was about to faint. Sighing, Erza took out a flare from behind him. A dazzling firework exploded in the air. This is the signal agreed upon by the companions that Erza met on the road before. As long as Erza fires the signal flare, the surrounding companions will rush towards here soon. Not long after, several wizards from Fairy Tale appeared in Erza's sight. Erza quickly waved to the crowd, pointing at Big Slow, who was sitting on the ground and was about to pass out. "Quick, you guys take Big Slow to the hospital." Looking at Big Slow, who was about to faint, Fairy Tale's companions did not hesitate at all. They carefully helped him up and rushed towards the nearest hospital. After being taken away by his companions and Big Slow, the little bit of consciousness left made him forcefully look away. Looking at a mask that appeared not far away, Big Slow pointed weakly at the mask and said, "Don't look into my eyes. Help me bring the mask back." The crowd handed the mask to Big Slow and watched him put it on. Because everyone is a mage, and they're very familiar with the road of Magnolia. Even though Magnolia was very crowded these days, everyone arrived at the hospital very quickly. While the doctor was treating Big Slow, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Wait at the door for the doctor to come out. After a while, Big Slow covered his chest with his palm, still feeling some tightness in his chest. When everyone saw Big Slow's figure coming out, they hurried forward to ask. Seeing everyone's concerned eyes, Big Slow lowered his head with some guilt. He murmured to the crowd and asked, "We have treated you like this. Why do you still save me?" Everyone looked at each other and then burst out laughing. "What are you talking about, Big Slow? We are all wizards of Fairy Tale. We are a family. Who would refuse to save their own family members?" Looking at the smiling faces of the crowd, Big Slow felt even more guilty. Opening his mouth, Big Slow wanted to say something, but it seemed that something was stuck in his throat and he didn't know how to speak. At this time, someone seemed to have noticed Big Slow's appearance, patted him on the shoulder, and said with a smile, "Don't worry, Erza will give Legasis a good beating, and then bring him back. That's right, we are a family. We will not give up Legersis. Lager thus is just a naughty boy in our family. We don't hold grudges against him for it." Looking at the smiling faces of the crowd, Big Slow couldn't help being infected by the crowd. Thanks. At this moment, Shing Guthro seemed to wake up. He chose to follow Lagerthas because of the power of Lagerthus. But at this moment, he was deeply infected by everyone in Fairy Tale. "Okay, Big Slow, you have a good rest. We don't want to continue the banquet when you are well." One of them patted Big Slow on the shoulder, and then he yelled at everyone to walk out of the hospital in unison. Seeking Flower Zero, they still have to look for other people, and because of the freed technique, there are probably many wounded. They also had to find other injured people and take them to the hospital. Looking at the backs of everyone leaving, Big Slow couldn't help muttering to himself and said bitterly, "Lager thus. You are wrong. We are all wrong. On the streets of Magnolia, Erza was chasing Zeus and the others all the way. Because of the booster armor, Erza is very fast. The whole person turned into an afterimage and kept running and jumping on the roof. Evergreen is also constantly fleeing under the pursuit of Zeus and the others. Soon, AI Lucy caught up with Evergreen. Zeus, looking at Evergreen and the three homies flying in the air, Erza quickly shouted at Zeus, "Erza, here I come." With a sudden break, Zeus stopped directly, turned his head, and rushed towards Erza. Stopping in front of Erza, before Erza could speak, Zeus said, "Erza, I can already feel the breath of Lagerthus. It's over there. Let Evergreen be the three of us. You just go deal with Lagerthus." Because Zeus was once fed by Lagerthus, he was extremely sensitive to the breath of Lagerthus. As long as he is close to Lagerthus at a certain distance, Zeus can perceive his approximate location. Erza looked at Zeus in a daze and was stunned for a moment. Unexpectedly, these words would come from Zeus's mouth. But looking back, it was only normal to say from Zeus's mouth. If you had changed to Poro and you lived Napoleon ruthlessly, it would be absolutely impossible for you to say such a thing. Among the three homies, Zeus is the most stupid one, but also one of the most human emotions. Erza nodded heavily and stretched out his palm to caress Zeus' body. "Then leave it to you."
No more novels? Take part in the voting. The most requested novels and those with the most likes will be chosen for publication on euroaudiobooks.com. There, I can upload as much as I want without the risk of receiving a strike. Our 18 novels and other content that exceed what is morally acceptable are only published on Patreon or the free novels page. Remember, the site is funded by donations on Ko-fi and Patreon memberships.